you. More.
Yeah.
Okay.
This room is so damp that it
Gotta be some structure.
together.
Oh, yeah.
This is from a month ago. That I told you it was buried.
Just this top one?
Yeah. Just hello, how are you? Good.
Can I keep this pen so I can take some notes? I don't know where my pens went. Thank you. Thanks, Amy. You know I'm a note taker.
Let's have a comment card they want to turn in before we get the meeting started.
Good evening. Cats, very nice.
You know,
You know it's summer.
it's summer on a Tuesday. That's an extra.
I got my flip-flops on.
I have flip-flops on too, and a hat. And I thought, you know what?
I came from working in the garden.
If we were at St. John's, it would have been totally fine. And I just decided to take the risk, Joe.
Oh, should we get this started?
Yep.
I'm just risky.
All right.
Right.
I'm going to call to order the Middletown City Council special meeting for Tuesday, June 8th, 2021, for the purpose of talking about the Oakland neighborhood. And we will do a roll call here in just a moment when Miss Skank returns.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
It's like,
I'm sorry. Do you want this pen back?
No, I got
Okay.
it. Mr. Troy,
Here.
Ms. Nettie,
Here.
Mr. Moon,
Here.
Mr. Mulligan,
Here.
Mayor Condrey.
here.
Now, I would also like to take this opportunity and call the roll for the Historic Commission because a majority of those members in attendance. So technically, we're discussing city business at this meeting, so is that all right?
Great idea. Yes, I love it.
All right, so I'm going to call the Historic Commission board members: Roger Daniel. Here. Levi Kramer. Nancy Romero. Here. Matt Dixon. Jim Stabler. Jeremy McKenis. Here. Andy Brickler. Here. Thank you. I'm sorry. David Myers. Thank you.
Great, and we need to receive and file the special meeting documents. Is there anything specific we need to do to accomplish that? I can never remember that part.
No, just that City Council did ask for this special meeting outside of our regular meeting schedule. So I just have a motion to receive and file the special meeting documents.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. King, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Moon,
Yes.
Mr. Mulligan,
Yes.
Mayor Condrey,
Yes.
Ms. Nenny,
Yes.
Ms. Vettori.
Yes.
Great, and with that, we will kick off the discussion. Mr. Palaniuk, did you want to kick this off with a kind of a background on anything?
Yeah, actually, we have a series of presentations, and if you would allow us to complete those, then you can open it up fully to discussion after that point. So we're going to start with Ashley Combs, Director of Development Services. Then I have a few things I wanted to cover, and then we have a really special guest this evening, who is Barbara Powers from the State Historic Preservation Office.
Great.
Good evening. There was your meeting agenda. All right, so I'm going to start off by giving the Oakland neighborhood history, the background here. So the Oakland neighborhood was originally created to support the new American rolling mill, known as ARMCO, manufacturing facility, by providing employee housing and a walkable distance to work. However, ARMCO built a new facility and relocated in the 1960s, which created a decline in the viability of the neighborhood. This neighborhood is primarily single-family housing. It has a traditional development pattern with homes that are located close to the street that feature front porches and alley-loaded garages. This neighborhood currently has issues with crime, low property values, and tax delinquencies. As you can see, this is just a GIS map showing the Oakland neighborhood. Oakland Neighborhood Conservation District. The Oakland neighborhood was historically designated by the city's Historic Commission in December 2019, and then historically designated by the City Council in April 2020. In mid-2020, the Oakland neighborhood was redesignated as the city's first conservation district by the Planning Commission and City Council through the text amendment process. The Historic Commission reviewed the text amendment and was supportive prior to the review by Planning Commission. The text amendment became effective in November 2020. So as you can see, this red outline is the current Oakland neighborhood boundary. Oakland neighborhood review process. The neighborhood has been marketed as a light historic district. Conservation districts focus on preserving elements that pertain to the character of the neighborhood. This is accomplished through protecting items such as architectural styles, densities of the neighborhood, heights of the structures, and setback guidelines. The Conservation District Certificate Appropriateness Review process is less restrictive and less costly to owners for exterior alterations. Unlike the typical historic district review, conservation districts only require that new alterations visible from the public right-of-way require review by the Historic Commission. However, the historic property specialist has the right to forward exterior alterations that they feel do not have the intent of preserving the character of the neighborhood. This is just an example of a home that is located in the Oakland district. Oakland neighborhood revitalization. The Oakland neighborhood is identified as one of the 8 special interest areas in the city's comprehensive plan that is currently being updated. The vision for the Oakland neighborhood is a thriving, revitalized residential area that is in close proximity to downtown. Revitalization in this neighborhood is focused on key redevelopment opportunities that include infrastructure improvements, wayfinding, safety and lighting, walkability, cultural assets, infill housing, the Vail School site, the Carnegie Library, and the city's Oakland Park. The top photo is a rendering of the Carnegie Library, and down below that is the Oakland Park rendering. Oakland neighborhood goals. The city is investing resources to create successful, marketable neighborhood that will attract first-time homebuyers, empty nesters, those who want to support and enjoy downtown local businesses, restaurants, the arts, and other quality of life amenities. The aim for this neighborhood is to expand its pedestrian amenities and offer high-quality multifamily housing with a mix of uses on the former Vail site. Another goal for this neighborhood is to add jobs and owner-occupied housing. This is just an aerial of the Vail site, and to the left of it, you will see the Carnegie Library. I'll turn it over to City Manager, Mr. Palnick.
Thank you, Ashley. We're very fortunate this evening. We have Barbara Powers is with us. And Barbara is the Department Head and Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer for Inventory and Registration. And basically, she is the avowed expert when it comes to all things historic districts, historic preservation in the state of Ohio. So you're going to have the opportunity not only to hear from Barbara, but also to really answer or to ask any and all sorts of questions that you may have or that anyone here may have. Before that, I wanted to offer just a little bit of my own observations. First, about some things learned over a career in 30-some years of doing local government, primarily in older historic communities, and then talk a little bit about some of the plans that we have for the Oakland neighborhood and what we're also calling the State Route 4 corridor redevelopment. I've had a chance over the last 30-some years to be very involved in historic preservation, adaptive reuse, working with National Register historic districts and properties, making decisions on that. And I will tell you that I'm a huge advocate when it comes to historic preservation. It is the ultimate in recycling. It is the first kind of recycling, and it has always made a lot of sense and worked really well in a lot of different categories. From being city manager in Dowagiac, Michigan, where we had an entire downtown Main Street was on a National Register district, to Bay City, Michigan, where we won the National Main Street Award back in the late 90s, to Gastonia, North Carolina, where we were able to redevelop the largest textile mill under one roof in the United States, as 197 units of quality market rate housing and other mixed uses, commercial developments, to taking an old, dilapidated hospital that was in an African American neighborhood and turning it into high quality senior housing and really bringing back an entire neighborhood, to several other projects along the way, included in Fayetteville, where we were doing a minor league, this is North Carolina, minor league baseball stadium that also involved bringing back an old hotel as residential, and then building a new hotel next to it, to Racine, where we did a number of different projects, and in some cases made some decisions also on how we weren't able to do those projects. and how they were economically not feasible to continue. But that's some of the things that come along with it. So I want to just mention a few things that when you look at some of these issues, where there are advantages and there are disadvantages. And some of the advantages of having national historic designation or a national registered district, of course, is number one, there are tax credits available. So if you can get value from a historic tax credit, that can make a real difference when you're trying to do adaptive reuse and historic preservation, particularly on some of these really complex capital stack projects. But understand that in those cases, they have to be income-producing properties. So if you're a single-family home, there really is no benefit from that. And in fact, if the goal is to get more single-family home ownership, then it might be a bit counterproductive to try to incentivize, the idea of having tax credits, because the only way you're going to take advantage of that would in fact be having it income producing. The other advantage, of course, is that sort of immediately comes to mind, is there are a number of restrictions that come with the National Register designation, because, in most cases you have a local historic commission that then enforces a series of restrictions that go along with preserving the architectural integrity, the color, the texture, the materials of the housing. So if you have a group of inventory of homes and or structures or buildings that you really want to maintain in its true historic character and integrity, it can be very restrictive and it can get those things accomplished. Now on the flip side of that, of course, is those are very restrictive. And in some cases, there are property rights that people come up with or come to the conclusion that they want a little bit additional flexibility when it comes to the way that they might reinvest in their property. So when we think about it, the size and the scope dictating is also oftentimes dictates the desired outcomes. So if one of your desired outcomes is to promote property maintenance, then having the National Register District can be very important, because you can have those very strict restrictions and make certain that people follow those very strict restrictions and have a consistent character theme that is maintained, that the materials are there, the colors are there, followed on a very strict way. Now, it can be disadvantageous to people of limited means, because there is not as much flexibility when it comes to if you're replacing with a different material, or if it's a more contemporary material or a different color, things of that nature. If you're promoting or creating owner occupancy of single-family homes, as I mentioned, it could oftentimes be counterproductive. To encourage investment, certainly if it's income producing, it certainly adds to encouraging investment in this case. There is a strict adherence to precise historic standards, and that can sometimes come up against the flexibility. So I think what I've seen over time usually is that when you have that inventory of really iconic, high-quality historic structures, be they downtown buildings, be they commercial buildings, be they neighborhood homes, there is a real desire and need for having historic designation, either individually for the structures or as a district. But I think when you try to get too large in some cases, and if you're taking into that some of the areas that in fact don't meet that criteria, where people would much rather prefer a good deal more flexibility, and where it tends to be more owner occupied and you don't get the advantage of the historic tax credits, then that's oftentimes where you might compress some of those areas. So there are ways that you can do individual designations, and obviously ways to have entire districts, and you can mix and match those, and in the end of the day try to, and that's what I've always seen done, and that's what tends to happen, evolved in communities, is you get the scope of the district, the size that makes sense for achieving the kind of desired outcomes you're after. Sometimes that's individual designations, and sometimes that is larger districts. So in the end, I guess what I've learned over time is designation ought to be for the right reasons and not necessarily for the wrong reasons.
Hey, Jim, I think some people are having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. I'm not.
Oh, I apologize.
Can't do a whole lot.
This thing isn't as probably as tall as it ought to be, and I'll try to speak into it a little bit closer.
Thank you.
But again, I'm going to let Barbara really speak to all those issues related to historic districts and designations because she's the expert. I just wanted to offer a few thoughts. What I'd really like to talk a little bit about is kind of some of the plans that we hope to do within the Oakland neighborhood, within the State Fork corridor in this upcoming time frame. And we've talked a little bit about this. We've put this out to City Council, but we're in a more public forum today, so I'd kind of like to go over some of these things. And the thing is that recently, I think people are aware of the fact that the American Rescue Plan Act has come out. And as a result of that, there has been a bit of a windfall for older urban core communities, so-called metro cities. Along with counties, we've got an individual designation of federal funds. And those federal funds come in the form of the American Rescue Plan Act. And for the city of Middletown, specifically, we are getting $18,925,154 exactly. And of that total, yesterday afternoon, $9,462,577 was wired into the city's segregated account under the ARPA funds for our use. The remainder of that, an equal amount, will come exactly 1 year from today, so that we'll wind up with that $18.9 million in total. And of course, obviously, there are a lot of restrictions that come with these funds, but it can and it should mean some real great opportunities for our community to do some incredibly transformative things. And what we've said, and that we hope we will follow along the time here, is that because they're one-time funds, we should use them for one-time things. We can and we should be transformative with them. And we can and we should use them to do things that otherwise wouldn't be accomplished. And the legislation, in some cases, makes it clear that we can't use these funds for things. In other cases, it makes it very clear that we can. And in some cases, it's rather fuzzy. So it's still subject to interpretation, and we're waiting for additional guidance. But some of the things that are clear are you can use it to deal with the negative economic impacts of the pandemic. You can support businesses that are related to tourism and hospitality. You can support affordable housing and job production, particularly for those who were negatively impacted by the pandemic. So in that regard, thinking about transformative issues, things that will really matter in our community and that will make a difference. And then the third thing as well is to leverage other funds, be they other public sector funds or private sector investment, will go a long way to really transform our community. So we've thought that in terms of the things that could very well be the highest priority in this community that have the transformative effect and that make a difference would be the riverfront redevelopment, the mall redevelopment, and then this project specifically, which is the Oakland Neighborhood State Fork Corridor route. And of course, in this case, it very much is consistent with the legislation because it works to provide jobs because, negative economic impact of the pandemic. It creates affordable housing in a neighborhood that really needs it. It does clear cleanup and improvement to a neighborhood over time. So with that in mind, we recently wanted to be first in line to Butler County when it came to making an ask for some of their funds. And of course, we weren't so proud to think that we couldn't, be that first in line to make certain that they were thinking about Middletown when it came to using the sum of the $74 million that they're receiving through these funds. And when we thought about, how can we best leverage those funds and what might be the best sell to Butler County, we felt that this project specifically could do that, particularly because in many regards it's designed to do improvements to neighborhoods, and in those improvements produce and create new jobs. So specifically, we asked Butler County for $6.6 million, and that $6.6 million is divided up among several different items as you're seeing on the screen. First of all, we would spend, assuming we could get this from them, $2.38 million would complete the demolition, preparation, and remediation of the 14-acre paperboard site, which we know after the fire is truly an eyesore. It is a hazard. It is very unattractive on that corridor, and it also would be a very attractive site for redevelopment, given that it's 14 acres. Another $1.6 million would go to acquire, demolish, and complete the remediation of the 24-acre former AK Steel headquarters and research site that is immediately across the street and contiguous to the paperboard site. 1.57 million then would be to acquire, demolish, and complete the remediation of the old 19-acre CERTA site. You all have actually approved the city's purchase of this, which we have done now, and then this funding would go to do the demolition, the remediation. And if we could consolidate those three sites together, they would be 57 acres of redeveloped, remediated sites for high-quality, clean industry, not smokestacks, not warehousing, not trucks, not emissions, but clean, good quality jobs. That would be the goal, sort of business parks, R&D, that type of a thing. And then an additional $1 million specifically for what we're calling Oakland Neighborhood Housing Initiative. So if we look a little closer at that, and you all have seen this in greater detail, but I don't think we've really said this to the public. This goes into, if you see on the screen now, basically how we break down those dollars for the industrial park development. It's about $5.59 million. And then the Oakland Neighborhood Housing Initiative, a little over $1 million, $1,081,400. We were asking for $375,000 that would basically take 50 of the vacant and condemned residential dwellings, do the demolitions on those, get them back to vacant property lots available to build on, and then take 20 of those properties in a strategic manner and create a scattered site new home building program where we in effect would subsidize individual home builders to be able to recognize that they can't currently build a home and sell it at a profit for the price that the market would demand. So we basically would pick up the subsidy by saying whatever that difference, that delta is between what it costs you to build it plus your basic profit margin, and then what you'd sell it for on a reasonable market, we will make up the difference so that you, in effect, create a market. You sort of build a market where it wouldn't otherwise exist to make that happen over time. So then in addition, if you'll just jump to that next slide, there it is. We just show here in much greater detail where the dollars go in the remediation and the development of these sites. So unfortunate, these can be very expensive when it comes down to remediating old industrial sites. If you look at the 14-acre paperboard site, that $2.38 million, you have quite a different number of areas between asbestos removal, off-site disposal of impacted soils, actual demolition, and other things that wind up making up that expense. The same thing with the CERTA site. You have asbestos, you have phase 1 and 2, you have soil remediation, you have actual demolition of the structures. You have our original acquisition cost, so in total that becomes a $1.9 million component of this project. And then the AK Steel site, which is 24 acres, that in and of itself becomes $1.6 million. But we think that we make a very, very compelling argument to Butler County that this was the legacy of our community in creating high quality, good jobs that really made a difference in this community. And over time, as some of the decay happened, we'd like to bring it back in a very high quality manner again to say, hey, it started there and it can be there again in the future. We just have to recognize that these are the kinds of things that you have to do. And if there was ever a time to take advantage of these funds, this is precisely what those funds ought to be for. So then, if you look at the next slide as well, we also acknowledge to the county that we wouldn't just be asking them for their funds. Obviously, we would be committing funds ourselves locally in this process. And of course, we haven't made specific decisions on this, so these are illustrative only, and some of these numbers would change clearly, but it gives an indication of the kinds of things that we could do in support of this. So this would suggest that the city would put another $475,000 into the Route 4 corridor industrial park development, specifically in the acquisition, some of which we already have completed. We would look to expand and improve the Sunny Hill Community Center. We have talked about needs in our community for youth and teens, particularly more things for them to do, keep them active, keep them fulfilled, give them training, give them sport activities, give them indoor opportunities, as well as for our unemployed and underemployed, there could be training opportunities. But if we could expand and improve that site, both the city and the school district have funds available for that project. So if we, for instance, this contemplates matching each other's $1.6 million, together that would be $3.2 million to make that a real difference and be part of this Oakland and State Route 4 corridor development area. Then, of course, we would be adding funds to the scattered site condemnation and demolitions as well, to the tune of an additional 25 properties, and then the funding for 10 more homes that could be built. So in this case, if you imagine this coming together with both county and city, we would wind up doing, I think it's 75 total demolitions and 30 new home builds. And then it also contemplates the city providing funding assistance to the Vail site in the form of $500,000 of ARPA funds and $1.3 million in home funds. In addition, under the ARPA plan, not only are we getting almost $19 million in simple ARPA funds through the Metro City program, but there was additional funds through the home program as well. So that could go a long way to support, some high-quality housing in that area, and it would make a real jump start in that. So in combination, that's about $4.4 million of funding identified by the city. And then if we imagine that the schools could contribute, an equal amount to the community center, that then puts over $6 million to the request from the county at over $6.6 million. And now you're approaching $13 million of new investment. We think that would leverage a huge amount of private investment. To that end, we have actually entered into a letter of intent with a developer for the Vail site. They have an obligation under their due diligence plan to actually return their first basic site plan concept to us, I think by the end of this week, and then within, I think it's a month or two thereafter, they have to complete their due diligence, and we then could determine whether or not we want to enter into a complete development agreement with them. But the idea that they would be doing high-quality housing with some mixed-use components to it. So again, there's really great opportunities here. We think this can and should lead the way in much of the redevelopment in our community. We think it ought to exist as one of the three primary priorities for funding with ARPA, and we think a lot can be done with infrastructure, with improvements to the community center, with development on the Vail site, with cleanup, remediation, and much more job-producing development on the former industrial sites, and then a series of programs for the neighborhoods to not only eliminate some of those vacant, dilapidated structures, but in their place build quite a number of new, modest, single-family homes for the first time in many years. We also have been talking about a program, and we're excited about it. We don't have real details yet, but we'd like to be able to put it together, where we could not only train some folks who are underemployed or unemployed in construction and trade skills, but then as they're doing the training, part of their training could be actually making improvements to people's homes in that area. Specifically, if someone needed a new porch or a new HVAC system or components or a roof or painting or windows or other things, that this could be, funded again through ARPA, that would combine both a training program that is going to be critically necessary in the future because of all the money that's going to be spent in and around this region with new construction, but also training those folks to get the jobs in that and to be actually doing it within their own neighborhood, and in turn identifying the folks that don't otherwise have the resources to do some of those things and improving their particular homes by having them get a chance to get some of that as part of a training program. So these are some of the thoughts that we have. We're excited about it. If you look at that next slide up there, this is just kind of a look at why we see it as sort of the State Route 4 corridor. At one end, the green box down there is the Sunny Hill Community Center in Douglas Park, where we think some nice improvements can happen. You move up farther along the corridor and you see that turquoise area, which is the former AK Steel site. Next to it, the blue area, the former Serta site. Above it, the sort of goldenrod area, the 14 acres, that is the paperboard So you take those 3 sites together, they're 57 acres, contiguous along the corridor, could be job producing right in the heart of this neighborhood, and then surrounding it with the Vale site on one end producing high quality jobs and amenities and community features, and then in and around it in a sort of mixed use critical mass way, improving some of those neighborhoods by getting rid of some of the blighted structures, as well as building a number of new homes in the process. Also, let's not forget, in the process of our doing some $51 million in new paving over the course of the next 2 years, many of the streets in this area are going to wind up being repaved. And we didn't have an overlay on that, we forgot, but we should have brought that as well, because you would see as well that actually a lot of these areas are happening this year. These are some of the areas that will happen over the course of the next number of months. So with that, we just wanted to give you a sense of just how committed we are to this neighborhood, what we want to see accomplished, and how exciting. And the fact is, more than anything, there are actual resources. And we want not only this community, but others around us to make it clear to the county that this is a great way for them to spend some of their dollars, and we'd love to participate and help them as well. So with that, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Barbara Powers. As I said before, Barbara is the department head and deputy state historic preservation officer for the state of Ohio. She has many, many years of working on historic preservation issues, many years of working with and working through historic districts, historic designations, both individually and on a district basis. And we're really pleased to have her and glad that she was willing to come out tonight. So Barbara, it's all yours.
Thanks. Thank you for inviting me to come. I have to say, Middletown holds the distinction of being the first public meeting I've been to in a year. In person, I'm happy to not be a square, a Hollywood square on a box talking to you all tonight. As the city manager mentioned, I work in the Historic Preservation Office. Actually, you can just go, whoever's doing next slide. I've worked there for 38 years and working exclusively with the National Register of Historic Places. So I've worked with a lot of communities throughout the state of Ohio, including Middletown, as you nominated and listed the, most recently, the Central Avenue Downtown Historic District and the Manchester Inn, and expanded the Central and Main area in the downtown. So I've been invited here tonight to talk with you about the National Register of Historic Places and talk to you about it in a general way, to talk about the general program process, and I certainly think along the way maybe demystify some of what the National Register is and is not. I am not here to discuss any specifics associated with the proposed historic district in the Oakland neighborhood. Our office received a preliminary National Register questionnaire, and through my presentation, we'll talk about what that is, for a proposed district in the Oakland area. And we conducted a site visit in the area last August and met with the city. Our follow-up from that site visit acknowledged that there was a potential for a National Register historic district. And we also gave some very specific guidance about additional information and research that would be required to actually determine National Register boundaries for any district, National Register district that would be nominated. We have not received any additional information addressing those recommendations, and we have not received a National Register nomination for the area. So I can't tell you, and it's the ceiling's leaking. So I don't know, I can't tell you what any type of National Register boundaries for any proposed district in this neighborhood would be. So what I can explain is the basis for National Register boundaries, and as I said, the overall National Register program as it functions throughout the country and how it functions in Ohio. So with those expectations clear, let me get started. So we I work in the State Historic Preservation Office, and we are a division of the Ohio History Connection, also known as the Ohio Historical Society. And that organization, as well as our office, helps really carry out the business of history for the state of Ohio. And the State Historic Preservation Office, we oversee the programs that are part of the National Historic Preservation Act. And those are basically, we work with communities and property owners and local officials to identify, evaluate, and protect historic properties throughout the state. So next slide. We do a lot of things. We develop a state historic preservation plan, which we're in the process of doing right now, this coming year. We help people survey or just basically identify historic properties. We nominate properties to the National Register of Historic Places. Our office reviews the proposed work for properties that are seeking the historic preservation tax credits. We coordinate and review and consult on projects that are federally funded, that are impacting historic properties associated with the National Register. And we work with communities like Middletown who want to take that next step and shape local historic preservation programs and also become designated as what we call certified local governments. And Middletown has gone through that process and is recognized by our office and by the National Park Service as a certified local government. And that means you all have created a local preservation program through your design review, through the designation of local historic districts. And we also do a lot of educational programs and publications and provide general technical guidance. So tonight, next slide, we are here to very specifically talk about the National Register of Historic Places. The National Register of Historic Places is really the cornerstone of the National Historic Preservation Program. And it is the official list of properties that are worthy of preservation for their significance in American history, archaeology, architecture, engineering, culture. The National Register was created out of the National Historic Preservation Act, which passed in 1966 and has been amended several times since. And the Preservation Act created that state and federal program to recognize and designate these properties. National Register properties can be recognized for their national significance, but also state significance or local significance. And as you see of our slides here, of all those over 4,000 listings in the National Register for Ohio, which amounts to over 50,000 historic properties throughout the state, the majority of them are listed and recognized for that local significance, that the stories they tell about their local communities. Part of those 4,000 listings are now really close to 600 National Register historic districts. So, actually, you mean a little factoid here, Ohio ranks third in the nation in number of National Register listings. We're behind New York and Massachusetts. And the National Register listing tells property owners, local officials, interested groups, citizens, you have something worthy of preservation. But I hope by the time I'm done speaking, you'll realize the National Register leaves that decision-making up to the people who are closest to that property and leaves it up to what it means to preserve it up to the property owners, the local officials, the community itself. So next slide, please. So what makes a property eligible for the National Register? First, there are three main ingredients. First, age. Typically, properties are 50 years or older, although there sometimes can be exceptions to that. Significance. Properties to qualify for the National Register must be considered significant. And for the National Register, that significance is evaluated or judged or based on four main, what we call the National Register criteria, A, B, C, and D. And they speak to broad patterns of history, like an industrial development of a community or the agricultural history of a rural township. B, people who are significant and made significant contributions to the development and the history of a community. Or properties can qualify under C, which is focusing on whether a property or an area represents a significant style of architecture or a type of building or an engineering structure or engineering practice. Or D, these are properties that are typically archaeological in nature because they have the ability to yield important information. And the last ingredient, and properties can meet one of those criteria or they can meet multiple. A property isn't better or more listed in the National Register because it meets all of the criteria. It's just really why is the property or the area significant? What does it reflect? How is it reflected and evaluated within which appropriate criteria? And lastly, historic integrity. The National Register, what makes it different from a historical marker or a history book is that it is place-based history. The National Register is nominating places that are significant in our history. And so a property to qualify for the National Register has to retain a sufficient amount of its historic physical characteristics that then convey its historic significance. So that is really intertwined. You have to understand why an area or a property that's being listed is important, is significant, what is its historic story, and then what are the physical characteristics that it has to retain in order to convey that story and help tell that story through its physical appearance. And that's sort of what makes the National Register different, as I said, from some other ways of documenting history and telling the history of a community. So next slide. When I talk about the National Register and I talk about properties, what am I talking about? Well, an individual property, an individual building can be listed in the National Register. Or structures, like a covered bridge or a canal lock, can be listed in the National Register. Sites, like the designed landscape that makes up the Mill Creek Park in Youngstown, Ohio, is listed in the National Register for its designed landscape features. Or objects, like the single sculpture, the Toronto World War I monument, right in the middle of the Toronto Town Square, is listed in the National Register. And, next slide, historic districts are also listed in the National Register. And historic districts, as the definition says, are concentrations of properties that together help to tell that significance or tell that history of the particular community or the particular area that has been recognized through the National Register. And districts come in all sizes and shapes. And as I said, we have close to 600 of them listed throughout the state. They can be like downtown Middletown, Central Avenue. They can be downtown commercial centers that reflect the commerce and business and aspects of the historic aspects of a community. They can be residential neighborhoods, or they can be college campuses, that collection of buildings that reflect the history and significance and sometimes architectural character of a college campus, or they can be entire townships. The Elizabeth Township Rural District is not far from here, in Miami County, and it is the entire township that is a collection of historic farmsteads and roads and tree lines and fencing, and the significant concentration of that makes up that historic district. Kelly's Island up in the Lake Erie Islands, the entire island is listed in the National Register for its history and collective architectural significance. And a couple of distinctions to make that when you have, well, any National Register nomination has a boundary. But particularly National Register historic districts have boundaries which encompass the largest, the most cohesive concentration of properties that collectively tell the history and significance of that district. So within those boundaries, the majority of properties, the majority of historic resources are going to be just that. They're going to be historic properties that were present during the time span, what we call the period of significance. You see on those titles, there's date spans on all those. That's the time period associated with the history and the significance of those respective historic districts. So you're going to have a majority of the properties within that boundary are what we call, they contribute. They add to your understanding of the significance of the historic district. But typically within that boundary, you may have properties that fall outside of that time frame that is designated and identified as the period of significance for the district, or there are buildings that were built during that time period, but they have been changed to such a degree that they no longer really look like properties dating from that time period. And those are considered non-contributing properties. And I stress this point of contributing and non-contributing because it has meaning on down the road here as to what I'm covering tonight. And the appearance and that integrity, it is always judged by and evaluated by the character and nature of the resources that make up that particular district. So next slide. Okay, here's probably the most two important slides I'm going to talk about all night is what does the National Register do and what does the National Register listing not do? I like to end on the positive, so we start with what does the National Register not do? The National Register listing does not change a property owner's rights as a property owner. I really can't say that more simply, and I can't say that more precisely. Listing in the National Register, that's what I'm focusing on, places neither restrictions nor requirements on a private property owner. You may do with the property as you wish within the framework of local laws and ordinances, like your zoning codes. And this is really important because this is often can cause confusion. National Register listing should not be automatically associated or confused with a community's local ordinances that may create local historic districts and set up local design review. Of those 600 districts that are listed in the National Register of Historic Places in communities across the state of Ohio, I love Venn diagrams, if people can think of a Venn diagram. Here's the National Register. Sometimes in a community, here's a local district. Sometime in communities, here's a local district, and then the next step is taken to nominate the area to the National Register, or vice versa. There may be steps are taken to nominate an area to the National Register, and remember I started my talk by saying the National Register tells you you have something worthy of preservation. a local community may say, hey, we want to take a couple more steps. We want to set up some local provisions to really instill some protection on that area, and we're going to create a local historic district that will have design review. But the National Register listing, what I've been talking about, does not automatically come with local design review. That is something your process, probably you all probably have to make decisions about to designate anything locally as a local historic district. And we can cover that in more detail and talk through that more in some of the questions too, but I really can't stress that enough. Because, like I said, the National Register listing sometimes is a impetus for a community to take that step, but they really are separate processes. They're all recognizing historic properties, but they are definitely separate processes. So, next slide. What does the National Register do for you then? And I like to say, too, the National Register is certainly more of a carrot than it is a stick. And the world would be a very different place if the National Register had as much power as many people sometimes think it does. But it can be a very powerful, as the city manager said, economic investment and economic incentive tool, and other aspects, too. Ultimately, the National Register is a planning tool, and it's an educational tool. As I've said before, when properties are within a community are recognized in the National Register, property owners, local decision makers, you know what properties are significant, and you can take steps. You can plan for their preservation. National Register nominations, the documentation itself presents that history and that significance and provides documentation that often communities or local neighborhood associations or local historical societies take that information and help raise the awareness and tell people, hey, we have something listed in the National Register. Let's recognize how special it is, how distinctive it is. And they might do walking tours or take that information out of the National Register documentation and turn it into history markers or use it for other educational tools. But that is a real powerful aspect of the National Register, and that is to raise that awareness of how is the history of your community physically characterized by the historic resources of your community. Now, a little more tangible than creating a sense of pride and using it for planning purposes are the historic rehabilitation tax credits that are associated with the National Register of Historic Places. Income-producing buildings, meaning commercial or residential rental properties listed in the National Register individually or as contributing properties within a National Register listed district may qualify for federal historic rehabilitation tax credits. And in Ohio, we have a complementary program called the Ohio Historic Preservation Tax Credit. And again, properties that can qualify for both that state and federal historic rehabilitation tax credit are properties listed individually in the National Register or contributing properties within a National Register listed district. And again, those properties have to be income producing, commercial or residential rental. And they can be income producing right now. They may not have been income producing historically, but it's what they are used for right now that helps make that possible. Now, one little caveat is that the state, the Ohio Historic Preservation Tax Credit, it goes one other step. Properties may qualify to take advantage of that credit alone, not the federal, but just the state tax credit, if they are located within certified local governments and are part of a locally designated certified local government district, like what you have here in Middletown. So it's just the state credit, when it was shaped, they just provided an extra opportunity for property owners to take advantage of those historic preservation tax credits. The historic rehabilitation tax credits, federal or state, do not apply to condominiums or single-family private residences. Now, you are a property owner, you've decided to take advantage of the 20% rehabilitation tax credit, that's the federal tax credit, and the 25% rehabilitation tax credit that's associated with the Ohio State Preservation Tax Credit. So you've made that choice to do that. So in doing that, in choosing to take advantage of that benefit associated with National Register listing, the work that is done to the property in order to receive the tax credit has to meet certain guidelines, and those are called the Secretary of Interior's Standards for Rehabilitation. They are basically common sense guidance on how to rehabilitate a property, not restore, not bring it back to its, some pristine appearance, but rehabilitate it for some useful new purpose or continue its existing purpose, but respect the historic character that makes up that property, gives that property historic integrity. And in seeking the tax credits, applicants work with our office, our Technical Preservation Services staff, and the National Park Service, because the work that's done is reviewed at that state level and at the federal level in order to receive the historic tax credits. But again, if you're not seeking the tax credits and you're not asking our office for some specific guidance about how to repair a historic wood window or how to replace slate shingles, our office is not going to be involved in reviewing work that's being proposed to your property. Lastly, properties listed individually or as part of a historic district listed in the National Register are given special consideration in the planning of federally funded or licensed projects. And this is what's called the Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, and I'm sure you all are somewhat familiar with that. And it requires that all federally funded projects be coordinated with the State Historic Preservation Office to determine their impact upon historic properties. This review is a routine part of the planning process associated with federally assisted projects. The review does not guarantee that the property will not be affected or even demolished, but it does ensure that there is an opportunity to consider effects before the project occurs, and it also ensures that the project has a public component to it. There's public input to it. And this is another thing that often can be a myth about the National Register, is that National Register listing is what requires and brings about the coordination when there's federally funding involved. No. What brings about that coordination and requirement of coordinating with our office is the use of the federal funds. Whenever there's federal funds utilized or a federal license or permit required, like a cell tower permit, FCC permit, the first question to ask is, how is this project impacting properties that are listed in or qualify eligible for the National Register? So there's where the planning aspect of the National Register comes in. When you have properties listed in the National Register, you already know what's significant, and you can understand and anticipate that you're going to have to coordinate and work through and just think about how this project may be impacting historic properties. Now, a caveat is the COVID money, that may have some very specific requirements or not have requirements associated with the federal funding. I know there was some discussion of that when that all first passed, that it might be a streamlined process to coordinating the work on that. So anyway, let me wrap up here because I know there's some questions that we want to ask, or maybe have questions for what you're talking about locally too. Just quickly, I want to go through the process. Again, I'm just saying this in general because, like I said, we don't have any nominations currently pending in Middletown. Anyone can nominate a property to the National Register, meaning you don't have to necessarily be the property owner to prepare the documentation and prepare the National Register nomination. However, properties are not listed in the National Register without notification of the process to the property owners. When there are an individual property or a historic district that is less than 50 property owners making up owning the properties within that boundary, our office will write letters, send out certified letters informing the property owners and the local officials that the area is being nominated to the National Register. We also then notify them again when it's actually listed in the National Register. When we receive National Register nominations, there's a three-part review. First, our office, myself and members of my staff, review the National Register nomination that's been prepared, and what we review it against is those three ingredients. Does it meet the age requirement? Has it justified the National Register criteria that's being applied? Do the boundaries make sense? Are they justified? Does the area have historic integrity? And then the next step is that every National Register nomination in Ohio is reviewed by a governor-appointed board, which is called the Ohio Historic Site Preservation Advisory Board. It's a 17-member board. They're made up of historians, architectural historians, architects, archaeologists, planners, public members. And they meet 4 times a year. In fact, next Friday is their June meeting, their second meeting of the year. And they look at completed National Register nominations. And they advise our office as to whether or not, guess what? Those properties meet those 3 basic criteria, whether they've met the age requirement, whether they meet the National Register criteria and have historic integrity. So they advise our office. Our office is the nominating authority. So we make a final review. We sign the National Register documentation. We send it to the National Park Service. And it's at that level, at the federal level, that the properties are actually listed in the National Register. We have a historian at the National Park Service who reviews all of Ohio's nominations. And they too review them against the age requirement, the criteria, application of the National Register criteria, and against whether they have historic integrity. So I say all that to mean that, the National Register is a very powerful tool that can spur economic development, can raise public awareness, but first and foremost, it is documenting, it's a place-based history, and it's documenting that history. So I'll wrap up. I have just 2 more quick slides. The National Register questionnaire. This is a preliminary document that we encourage folks who are pursuing or interested in nominating properties to the National Register to complete send us just some basic preliminary information. Our office reviews these and then gets back with some advice as to whether or not the property or the area that's being proposed, whether or not it looks like it might qualify and be successful if it were nominated to the National Register. So the questionnaire itself is not a National Register nomination. It's just a preliminary mechanism that we've developed to help give people some recommendations without having them launch into the whole full-blown nomination process. And my final slide. There actually is funding out there that can help fund National Register as well as other preservation projects. We receive, our state office receives appropriation from the National Park Service, funding every year. 10% of that money, which is about 90,000, no, more than that. Well, I don't want to quote myself and be incorrect. 10% of our federal appropriation is allocated back out to communities that are certified local governments to be for a competitive grant process. And so you all, Middletown, could apply for those grant funds to fund historic preservation projects within your community. Our bigger organization, the Ohio History Connection, we also have the Ohio History Fund, which is funded through people buying the Mastodon license plates and also through giving contributions to their state tax credit or state income tax. And that also funds a wide variety of historic preservation projects, and including National Register nominations. And the Ohio Development Services Agency, they are the state agency that actually oversees the state historic preservation tax credit. We partner with them, our office, the State Preservation Office, to review the work that's being proposed to the properties to make sure they meet the Secretary of Interior standards. But it's actually Ohio Development Services Agency that oversees and allocates and grants the state tax credits. Anyway, they have also created a funding arm called the Pipeline Grant Program that provides funding exclusively for nominating areas or properties to the National Register that will jumpstart and encourage properties, possibly those identified as potential for taking advantage of the tax credits. I think the Central Avenue District may have received some pipeline funding. So that's my presentation. I hope I've maybe anticipated some of the questions that were being written down tonight. I bet I didn't anticipate all of them, so I'm sure there'll be some more. But anyway, thank you very much for your time. I hope I've covered some of the basics of the National Register program and process. So I can stick around for a little while and answer any additional questions. So thanks again. Thanks for inviting me to come down.
Thank you.
Before we go into citizen questions, do we have any initial questions from council? I mean, I'm all for listening to everybody that's out there, but
I just had one question for Barbara, or do you want to hold those?
go for it. Let's go for it.
Is the only determining factor if a property is contributing or non-contributing if it occurred during the time period? Or are there other factors to which a property is defined as contributing?
Well, typically it is built or it was present during that time period.
Okay.
And also it adds to the history and significance.
Okay.
So,
Is
and,
that two then qualify?
right, two aspects that help define what are considered contributing properties.
So when you look at a large space like we're considering, some of those properties, you would determine, yes, it existed during the time period, and then does it contribute?
Right.
Whether or not it would then be considered contributing. But if it wasn't during that time period, then it's automatically not considered.
If it was built outside that time period, no, it would
Okay.
be considered what we call non-contributing. And like I said, a district National Register, that's all
Sure.
I'm talking about tonight. You all may be talking about local designations or conservation districts or your own local programs. But for the National Register, you know, you try to draw the most cohesive boundaries that encompass that history, significance, and the physical properties that convey that significance, but you're not going to typically draw a jiggy-jaggy boundary that, you know, zigzags out and avoids all non-contributing properties. But it's really always the most comprehensive, most cohesive, tightest boundary to do that.
That makes sense.
Because, again, local districts, local boundaries may be different, because local ordinances, local communities have, you know, other factors that they may want to come into play. So a National Register boundary is not necessarily always going to line up precisely with perhaps a local designation, or vice versa, because, you know, sometimes local communities want to have more say, because you have design review, you want to have more say over what is put on what now are vacant lots, or, you know, open spaces. And so you might include those areas even though they don't retain integrity, but the National Register typically would never include like what we call a buffer zone. But again, not to say it wouldn't include open land, but again, it's just that it would be tightly associated with the history and significance. Because, and again, that's just the different nature of the two programs and districts that are all kind of trying to achieve the same thing, but just going about it different ways. Good question.
Thank you.
Anything else from council before we open this up? Okay, we have 4 comment cards that have been submitted so far. So we have Mr. Dan Mazum, if you want to come up to the dais and state your name and address for the record for us. And I guess we're going to do the 3-minute rule on this, but I think we may find, let's go with that to start and kind of see where we go. How does that sound? And then council can kind of go from there, so.
Okay. Hello, my name is Dan Mazum. I live at 11 Matthews Court in Glendale, Ohio. I own the property at 1320 First Avenue, which is the Carnegie Library. I had a few items here. First of all, thank you everyone for pulling this together in the working session. I truly appreciate it. Dear to my heart. Second of all, I'll just go down the points here really quick. I understood this to be a working session with neighborhood and community shareholders, so I would hope that this could continue as a working session as I understood it. I don't know how that's defined. Plus anyone else who's attended hasn't been able to fill out a card yet, if they could also contribute as well. Second of all, I've been partnering with the city for 2 years now to help to establish the historic district, with the Carnegie Library securing a local significance by the CLG, and this was approved, as I understood it, by the city council as a historic district. So it's a little confusion on my part why that's not finalized and secure and set as a National Register place. Next, knowing the Oakland securing the historic district elevates the property, the values in that area, and allows it to be comparable to other historic districts like South Main and the Highlands. So I think as a contribution for that, as another factor of it becoming a historic district, helping elevate those properties and those values. And then knowing that the National Register does not place restrictions on the properties, and that's more of a local designation. Hopefully that'll help clear up a lot of the confusion that could potentially be out there. The next is the blighted and vacant homes that would be demolished. I saw in the plan up there that the budget for that within the historic district, those homes are key for people to be able to come in like they are in other communities and buy them or at a low cost, and then use the funds, incentives to help fix them up. So they are truly buying low and putting their sweat equity and their dollars into fixing those up. That was kind of the original initiative of that. And then the Oakland qualifies under the national, where it would include the AK Steel site from what Ms. Powers was just saying. That's how I understood it. But the local, it could annex some things out of that, but still, that designation of that story of the AK Steel site with the property there, capturing the research lab and anything else that would really help to define that story for the district. And then also the basic plan for the Vale at the end of the week, knowing that something's going to be delivered on that. And as I understood it, that there's discussions that Curtis Street running alongside and in between the Vale and the Carnegie could be abandoned and pulled into that development, and what that could really mean, because I know from being there at the Carnegie, having that as a bus route and also a lot of traffic, pedestrian going through there, cutting that off potentially, and what does that mean for access for the Carnegie on the side for deliveries and everything else. And I know that there's also a couple other property owners, at least one, that has properties that only face Curtis, so how that works too. Next, and second to the last point.
We're gonna stop there, but I'm not saying that we won't allow more comments. I think we're just gonna get through the 3 minutes of everyone, and then we'll kind of decide as council how we're gonna do this, because it's not normal.
Right.
It's not a normal council meeting, but
Thanks
let's,
for letting me review those.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, Mr. Dan Barton's up next.
Thank you. Dan Barton, residing at 338 Central Avenue in Dayton, and I'm the contractor working on the original Oakland Renaissance plan. I know I've only got 3 minutes here, but I also have a document that I'm going to give for your consideration. It's basically a development plan to relaunch the strategy that we had deployed, which was to create incentives for all of the investors, the homeowners, the big developers, and the people who want to come in and do infill, and also the people who want to take advantage of the National Register process. And there's a way. Small individual properties can be done through that, but I don't want to waste my time on that. And I can give you an update on the National Register process and where we are in that process that Barb talked about. But again, what I want to do is basically identify that the project that you all heard in depth and had approved is in phase 2. It is 95% completed. Basically, a number of things remain before it could be launched, but those things that remain were a decision by you folks and the city administration on the nature of the incentives that would come out of the TIF district proceeds. And we need to refresh the TIF district proceeds assumptions around the payment in lieu of taxation that would go to the city that Mr. Adkins had worked out a scenario with, and the other recipients of those. So there was some intellectual work that needed to happen to make that come to be. With the advent of the COVID and the slowdown and the lockdown, a lot of things didn't happen. And this document here identifies those things which still need to happen to get this program back on track. To the issues that Mr. Palinik raises about the overall plan, that there is an investor for the Vale site, which is great, that there is interest in the AK site, which is extraordinarily good, because we not only have their concept of an industrial park, but we have an investor, a local investor, who wants to create residential housing. So the character of the neighborhood is really at stake here in terms of where it will be a residential neighborhood or a mixed industry and residential. To the issue of the overall plan, all of these things are advantageous within the framework of the plan. Someone developing the Vale site produces income into the TIF. Someone developing the AK site produces income into the TIF. If we complete the historic designation, we have documentation going back 30 years on the percentage of rate increase of the value of properties in National Register and local historic districts. So all of those things work to actually make the plan more viable than it was when we first discussed it and you voted to approve it. And so what I would like to have is a context where we could go over those in detail, because it's way more than 3 minutes.
And I'm gonna cut you off there, but like I said, I'm not saying that we won't bring people
Okay,
back up. I
sure.
just want to get everybody who's
Yeah.
spent their time to come
Thank
up.
you.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Mr. Richard Herr.
Good evening, and thank you for listening to me. I'm a resident of 1319 First Avenue, and I'm probably the neighborhood watch there. We when they first started this, I thought it was the Don Quixote and the windmills, but after talking to Dan and seeing what they're doing, it's really going to make a difference in the neighborhood. There's things that we need to do so that we go through with it. And also there's some things that the city hasn't done that have also undermined it, especially the building at Curtis and Girard, which is a steel structure, and that's in the Oakland Historical District. Somebody allowed that to go in while we were trying to get this through. That's really a slip up on the city. That shouldn't have been even allowed to be built. We need to move this forward and revitalize our neighborhood. I mean, people need a good place for residents, and living there for as number of years as I have in my childhood and in my adulthood, even though my siblings constantly bicker at me for not getting out of that neighborhood and leaving it, I'm attached to it. But I would like to see it move forward and become another viable neighborhood as I remember it in my youth. So it really is a benefit for the city to get this program moving forward, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the last one I have is from Mr. Doug Pergram, I believe.
Program 9 Libby. Most of my questions have been answered on the slide with paperboard, so it looks like it'll be at least a year away before lots might be available for to be constructed on, and that was one of my concerns right there. And I didn't know if it'd be done in phases, like where they'd started one in and get it ready, or wait for the whole thing, because I might be a couple years away. So that's all I had to say.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, I think we're kind of waiting to see if we can get some funding available for it, and then how that plays out, we'll all determine how that happens. I have a request for a brief recess for a restroom break and refresh. Would you guys want to take 5 minutes? And then I'd like to circle back. I know we have one more comment card. And also, can I get a hands up, how many people would like to speak that haven't, or even if you have come up, if you'd like to come back up, how many people are even interested in speaking again or additionally? 1, 2, 3, and I've got one more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, I think we could do 3 more minutes for each of those people easily. Are you guys okay with that?
I mean, I'm kind of interested in, after we take a break, but doing like a level set of how we got here from our opinion, from where we started, and then perhaps giving Dan and Dan a little opportunity to flesh out, because I think when we get into the TIF and some of these financial components, it is a little more specific in nature. So I would like to maybe just be able to listen to that as a group, because I think from what I've heard, there's just been things promised and miscommunicated, and my goal for tonight would be that everyone walks out of this room really understanding, especially the financial piece, because that's what people are concerned about as a homeowner and resident.
Sure, absolutely. Let's take 5 minutes, and then I want to get first this gentleman who has a card, and then anybody who hasn't spoken yet, we'll have you come up, and then Dan and Dan, you can come up again, and we'll talk about a lot more things. Okay, great. We'll come back at 6:57. We'll come back into session. She'll be here in a second.
Are this closed quotes?
Yes.
Hey guys, I want to respect everybody's time, so let's get back in our seats and keep on having great conversation.
But then I mean, if you want to speak to, okay. I mean, as long as we have the answers, I don't mind where they're from.
Okay, the next individual who would like to speak, oh, where's Joe?
I didn't even go to the bathroom. Story of my life.
Joe just walked out the door to go to the
I
bathroom,
should have gone.
and there might be a line.
There might.
I think we should continue. Okay, Mr. Michael Bailey, if you want to come on up and state your name and address for the record for us.
Good evening, Michael Bailey. I live at 1212 Curtis Street, and I'm the pastor of Faith United Church, 9 Baltimore. And so I just wanted to come up tonight to be a part of the conversation. Good to see you. Appearance and integrity.
Yeah, I was going to say, come on, you got to spread that love around.
Yeah, I got to share my love. Appearance and integrity, that's what I heard tonight. And I'm sitting here trying to absorb everything in to understand the facts. And right now, it appears that all the facts are not necessarily on the table. And I think I heard Amy said, hopefully we can get to that point tonight. I will say that I'm a product of the American Rolling Mill Company. I spent 30 years at Armco, and I understand a little of the history of George M. Verity and how, with his leadership, his vision, Middletown became a great city. So I'm proud to be a resident of Middletown, and I love my city. Where I live, 1212 Curtis Street, I'll never forget when all the corporate employees would just drive down my street and fill up the parking lot to go to work. And that was back when we had over 10,000 employees working for Armco. I do agree with some of the things I heard tonight. Affordable housing, need more single-family homes. But I do have a concern of the communities that are underserved and how we can move in and serve them. Faith United Church, we called it Baltimore Park initially, then we learned it was Oakland Park, and we adopted the Oakland Park and went in and began to engage with the community and began to see change, begin to see crime go down and relationships built and family dwellings feeling safe that they could send their kids to the park and play. That was pre-pandemic. A lot of things have happened. My main concern for where I live, the community I love, and all of what used to be and what George M. Verity brought to our city, we can do better than that. We do not need light industry on Curtis Street. I can already hear the trucks coming down my street and around other streets. And I'm asking this council to think through, and let's really come up and do what is right for Middletown and for the residents to live in the Second Ward. We love our home. We love where it's a safe place to live.
Thank you.
And my time is up.
Appreciate it. And I just want to confirm again, light industry, what we're talking about is not trucks.
If I may, I think.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, well, the idea is sort of commerce park kind of stuff. Not light trucks tend to be like warehousing and or heavy industry where trucks are either delivering product regularly on a daily basis or they're taking finished product away. That is not the kind of, sort of commerce, R&D kind of stuff we're talking about. Much lighter use. The primary traffic that you would see in and out would be the people who work there, the employees. Very little in the way of truck traffic. We understand that.
Thank you for the clarification. Okay, so I know there are a few other individuals who wanted to speak. If you want to come on up and state your name and address for the record. And if you don't mind, before you leave, if you want to fill out one of these comment cards, that way it helps Amy.
Sure.
Thank you.
So Andy Brickler, live at 301 The Alameda. I'm also the president of the Highlands Historic District. So a couple things I wanted to start off with is, these presentations, they talked a lot about some of the negative that comes with historic districts. I've been the president for the last 3 years of the district. We've marketed the city. If you look up the Highlands, people know what it is now. This year, we're having our largest yard sale, the 19th. So it's an engagement, it's an opportunity to market the city. It's share the wealth and information that these homeowners have in these areas and share it with everybody. So that's my first thing is, hey, just really think about, it's not all negative. It's not gonna, you can't paint this house this color and all this. I'm on the historical commission. That's what we do. We look at it and it's up to our interpretation of what cohesiveness is. It's kind of, we've had things from, let's see, the spoken, put in the window, right? That would not be a historical accurate thing to do, but it's the right thing to do in the city. It helped drive business. That's where I want to start with that. Second thing is, if you look at OTR, Hamilton. When I first moved to Middletown, I was looking at Hamilton. There was no way I was going to live in Hamilton 6 years ago. Right now, everybody wants to move to Hamilton because they're putting all the energy into the development. Really look what they're doing. Second thing is, we have a CLG that we passed. Are we using it? Do we believe? We hear people talk about we care about history and we want to preserve it. But then in that same slide, we're going to demo 45 homes to make infill properties for developers. Who are those developers? Is it open to every developer? Can anybody go do this? Or is it just the select chosen ones? And then lastly is, if you look into the last 6 years since I've been in this city, I've fallen in love. Like I met with Amy the other day and I told her, I'm not a Middie by heart. Wasn't born here. But I've been here 6 years and I've become a Middie and I'm getting involved. That's what it takes. And it takes people to come up here and have conversations so everybody gets a voice, not these conversations that happen. So thank you for your time. Have a great evening.
Thank you very much. Who else over there had a hand up, or anywhere, honestly, that hasn't spoken yet?
Nancy Romero, 120, moved, 604 South Main Street. Just want to say a couple of things. First of all, I am on the Historic Commission. I've been the chair of the Historic Commission for years, lived on South Main Street my entire adult life, been in Middletown my whole life, and apparently qualified to be a historic building now. But we won't go there. Just want to quickly say, demolition and preservation do not belong in the same page, much less on the same book. You cannot demo historic properties without, first of all, removing contributing properties. And if you build on those lots, which I have yet to see anybody build on any of the demoed lots we've ever done in, again, my 50 plus years in Middletown, we tear them down, but we don't put them back. Hamilton, as Andy said, does not tear them down. They give them to people or sell them low to people to rehab. You cannot build a new contributing property. You want contributing properties in a high percentage in your neighborhoods, you've got to not demo the properties that are there. There is no building that's not salvageable. I promise you, I've done tens in Middletown, in Highland and South Main, and we can't tear them down. It makes me really nauseated to see demoing of historic buildings. There's not a not salvageable building out there. I don't care if the HVAC is bad or the support beam is cracked or the roof has a hole in it. Those are all fixable, and those are things that you have to do to maintain your historic properties. Tearing them down, you've lost your opportunity to do that.
Thank you.
How are you guys? Jeremy Lucanis, 214 South Main Street. I'm here from Middletown Historic Commission. So after hearing everybody talk and everybody I see behind me, I know that there's a clear collision of staff, council, Historic Commission, community members, and I know, as Amy said, we're trying to get all that out on the table and get it rectified. When we initially, from Historic Commission, we were brought information that we're going to do this district, we're going to be a CLG, we're going to involve the community, we're going to do all these things. And we started having all these meetings, and we started to begin the process of meeting everybody that lived in that community and represented everything it was about. And I was really surprised by the amount of people that came out who were third, fourth, fifth generation Armco, third, fourth, fifth generation, my great-great-grandfather built this house and I'm still living in it. And what about the house across the street that's being torn down? And when's it going to be put back and what are we doing with this? And when you look at some surrounding areas like Dayton, like I know Jeff lives in the Dunbar district, you can see it's decimated by demolitions that were never put back. And I feel like we're tracking that way based on information from staff that they're not necessarily going to be here in 1 to 5 years like everybody else in the room is. Staff are always sort of in and out, just like the rest of us with our day jobs. And I'm concerned that we've been on this rotation of Doug says this, Jim says this, no offense. And then we follow that, and then people keep coming out every time I'm out eating or anytime I'm at a store, I run into people and they're like, hey, why did we tear this down? Or what happened to that? Why aren't we doing something about this? And it seems like we could just keep pouring money into demolitions when every other city anywhere around here is doing the opposite. And I, fortunately or unfortunately, sit on the CHAPS board in Hamilton because Hamilton doesn't have a historic commission. And when we come to them with documentation and we say, hey, we shouldn't tear this down, we think it's a viable building, magically, they don't tear it down, and magically, it gets revitalized, and magically, money starts coming in, and then a hotel gets built, and so on and so forth. But here, we just keep tearing them down, and when you look back at our library page, you'll see that starting back in the 50s, we've just been dropping buildings, and now we're left with a very small amount of historic buildings. And I know we have more that are on the horizon to be torn down because they've gotten so bad. So when I hear that we've already, in the middle of all that stuff with Oakland, we find out we're tearing down 250 houses. Now we're adding on 50 more. At what point have we pushed it too far that we can't salvage it, period, and we have completely devalued the people that are left standing there in their great-great-grandparents' houses? And that is my time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
If I could just make a comment on demos real quick. Hardest hit funds came out, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. Maybe not quite that long, maybe 10 years ago. And I believe Hamilton took down more homes than Middletown did, and it became a bone of contention with the county. So you might want to go back and look at some of those records as to what homes were taken down and how many were taken down. And as far as the commercial buildings, it pains my heart as much as anybody's when these come down, but to use the theater on Central as an example, and the city literally owned it for years upon years and begged people to come in and buy it. And there was just nobody that stepped forward that had the ability to do it. And I would welcome anybody to come in and take these buildings and renovate them and bring them back. Mr. Romero, if you want the buildings, please come in. You're here, not come in, just step forward with some plans, because I think we all want to save them. It's just we have to have a viable project that can actually save them.
I would be interested before the Dans come back. Is there anybody else besides the Dans who are interested? Sure, come on up. Yep.
Tammy Thompson, 1025 Woodside. Born and raised here. I ain't giving my age away, but I can remember when there was a lot of houses. I live on Verity Parkway. I have a lot of truck traffic all day, every day, 24 hours a day. So when you say light industry, 3 trucks is too many trucks when you put it in where children live. I would like to know about a TIF. What the heck is a TIF? And How's it going to affect me and my taxes? How's it going to affect me and my property? And it just bothers me that everyone keeps talking and talking and talking, but nothing is getting done. I would love to see it get done. If we can do it and people's taxes, who mostly are elderly people that live in our neighborhood, are mostly older people that have lived there most of their lives. Their houses are already paid for, so when you're talking TIF and you go back to talking about what it's going to cost these elderly people, I think we need to also put that in perspective of what's it going to cost those people that already are struggling to pay their taxes and pay for doctor bills and all that other things, that we really need to think about those people while we're talking about building a district that actually is already there. Let's just improve what's there. We don't need to keep adding industries to where citizens live. I played football on Armco Field, where they're talking about the tearing it down. We played football over there, so we played kickball over there. So there was traffic in and out, kids playing and cars going, but there wasn't that much truck traffic. There was car traffic, but there wasn't truck traffic. And that's my thing. I live over there, so I know where the kids play at. I know there's kids running back and forth around the neighborhoods. There's elderly people, you know, there's just, it's a neighborhood, and it's not for industry. If you want to put an office building there, put an office building there. But don't make it to where there's going to be truck traffic, boxcar traffic, and I don't care if they deliver in one truck. I don't want it in my neighborhood. Thank you.
So the question I have is, can maybe staff help with what is the downside to going through with the nomination for the historic district? Are there additional city historic regulations that would go on top of that district if we did apply and get the registry? How would that play out? Because obviously what we just heard was if somebody doesn't want to abide by it, they don't have to. It's only if they're going through.
That's not exactly what she said, and I would like to clarify that point. The National Historic Register designation, the title, does not infringe at all on property rights. Do you need me to come down so that gets...
You know what, if you don't mind, yeah, if you want to come up.
I just realized I'm usually sitting over there and people talk to me from the audience. Okay. The historic designation, the title historic designation does not mean anything as far as a property owner. What does mean is the CLG, the local law is what applies to homeowners and property owners in historic buildings. So it's not the National Historic Register. They don't have any. We as a community have written the laws and rules and regulations and in trying to keep the historic integrity. So it's not the National Register, it's us.
So what applies on Highland or what applies on South Main would apply here?
Yes and no. I mean, what applies to a house on South Main doesn't necessarily apply to a house in the Oakland district or on Highview. I mean, it's historically appropriate for the building that we're discussing. So there are guidelines and there are rules and regulations that say you have to stay true to the, I don't want to say it has to be stick for stick preservation, but it has to be true to the period of the home. So depending on the timeline and that, you know, a lot of things going to take into consideration. Time, you know, you wouldn't want to put lipstick on a pig, basically. You don't want to add high Victorian details to a modest Victorian home. You know, you don't want to add, you know, some of that fabulous stonework to a brick house. You know what I'm saying? It's not just time, it's integrity.
So if a homeowner lived in Oakland and they wanted to know what to expect, they could read the Historic Commission minutes to see, oh, this is what they've done over the last 5 years for all of these residential properties.
Yes, and actually there have been lots and lots of meetings between them and us with questions like that. Like, you know, if I want to paint my house chartreuse, can I? Probably not, unless it was a 1950s house. or maybe 60s. You know what I'm saying? It's not hard and fast. It's individual based on the particular property. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Well, and I think the other issue is that, as we talked about, there are different boundaries. The National Registry boundary can be one thing and the local can be another. Because I know if we start to get into, can I just do a quick level set on just how we got here?
Yes, yep.
Okay, because I feel like I've been here since the beginning. Because I met with Dan probably 3 years ago, and he really brought this topic to my attention. And at the time, the former economic development director and city manager were a little on the fence about it, and so we had a workshop. So Tal and Joe were both at that workshop. And at that workshop is when we heard from the Dans in terms of what is possible and how this can work, right? And that's where we start to get into, well, hey, your property values can go up, because now if you're historic, you'll be appraised against another historic home, increasing your property value. So that's a way that you can have access to equity, or sell your home if before you were underwater, or sell your home and make money and go somewhere else. So we looked at all of these factors. We talked about the TIF, which I would like to circle back on because I don't want to take on that task of explaining it. And that's why I think the three of us and our predecessors voted for this CLG process. And we did it with the understanding that the city would work closely with this neighborhood so that we would create programs, and whether it be through the TIF, whether it be through, we didn't really dive deep then, but we wanted to work with the community to make sure that they felt comfortable with the versions of access to capital they would receive and how we would redo this neighborhood. And so I think the intentions of everyone in this room are the same, right? We all want positive growth. We all want to work together and make a brighter future. I think that the details have gotten convoluted, partially change of leadership and COVID and what have you. But I really want to approach this with the spirit in which it began, which is we all want the same thing. And we just need to now look at the details and clear up the miscommunications so that we can take those next steps forward, but together. And that's why I think it's great the community is here to tell us their concerns. And then I'd like to hear, I think the Dans can give us a little more detail. We give them the other 3 minutes on more about how they set that up with what they had proposed, and then potentially hear from the city on what we think is now most valuable. And maybe we don't have the answers today, but I think laying out the community's expectations based on what we told them vis-a-vis meetings, former city staff, who knows, it doesn't matter. We told the community things and they have expectations, and then laying those against what the Dans had worked on, and we talked about before, and understanding what TIF means, and then looking at that as, okay, now what is the city gonna do? That's what I would love to see happen.
Absolutely. Joe?
No, I have recollections, similar recollections to Ms. Vittori about that, and I know, there was multiple factors that probably caused the evolution of this plan to get a little off track, but as we look at the Oakland neighborhood, this was to be a model for revitalizing Middletown neighborhoods throughout the city that are on the brink or teetering or need attention. And what a lot of it comes down to is home ownership, and how do we increase the 30% or it's in the 30% range of owner-occupied homes. In Oakland, and the state of Ohio is at 66%. The rest of Middletown is in the mid to high 50s. So that's what's really going to stabilize it and increase the viability of the neighborhood and the sustainability. So with regard to the slide that Mr. Palaniuk had about the 50 additional demolitions, I think that was just just to illustrate what could be used, how those ARPA dollars could be used. I think, obviously, if we have a historically significant home or a model home that we want to save, obviously the preferred method would be to have it renovated and updated. So I wouldn't take that to mean that, the takeaway from tonight, I don't think, and Mr. Palaniuk can correct me, is that our desire is to demolish 50 more homes in that area. We did demolish several dozens, but we had to get rid of the worst of the worst in these blocks to allow for some breathing room, to allow for some side yards, to allow for garages, whatever, all those modern amenities, and the infill housing would be a big component, because we do want some modern housing that is compatible with what exists there. So I'm keeping an open mind, and I agree with Ms. Vittori. I think we can come up with answers in the weeks to come, and we can all share that common goal and have some common understanding of how we move forward and improve the neighborhood. Thank you.
When it comes to the TIF, were the Dans planning to go into the TIF? Do the city want to go into the TIF?
I'd be more than happy to explain TIF.
Sure, yeah.
All right, no problem. TIF stands for Tax Increment Financing. Tax increment financing is probably the most ubiquitous, widely used, longest standing economic development tool that exists all across the country. Every state has different acronyms, different titles, different programs, but they all come down to some of the same basic concepts. And the primary concept is as follows, that as there is new additional investment within an area or on a particular parcel of property, the added value of that new investment adds to value that then is taxed on property. The added value, the increment of what is added.
Jim, can you just clarify, that occurs whether there's a TIF or not, right? There's added tax if you have an appraisal that,
Oh, no, hold on.
I just want to clarify, sorry, because
I'm talking about what TIF is designed for and the way it's supposed to work. I'll answer questions afterward. The concept is that with the additional investment, the additional value, you capture the increment that is created, and then you channel that increment to do something that will assist further investment or further enhancement or greater sustainability. So say, for instance, you have, let's pick the Vail site out, that right now there's nothing on it, but we get a developer to come in and invest $10 million in something. But to do that, we also have to have some additional amenities on site that might include some parking improvements, maybe some underground water and sewer, and maybe some sidewalks. So say now for that investor to put in $10 million on the site, they come to the city and say, boy, it would really be helpful if you could construct $1 million worth of infrastructure. So we say, okay, well, let's imagine tax increment financing can solve that, because we know if you do this, you're going to put in $10 million of new investment. The new investment is going to be valued at something close to that for property tax purposes. The new property tax that is created can get captured if we set up a particular legal device that can do that, and there are a number of different ones to do that, from enterprise zones to CRAs to simple TIFs to any number of things. And then we take those dollars, they're segregated, and they go directly to pay for the infrastructure that assists that particular project. So usually TIFs are done either to provide an incentive back to a developer or to pay for infrastructure to do something that otherwise wouldn't happen. What TIFs were never designed to do, and it's never part of the concept, is without any new investment, the simple idea that property would go up by simple inflation and you would capture the greater value and then do something with that. That was never the design, because the whole idea of TIF is it's an economic development tool. It wants to incentivize additional investment. And then if you have to use some portion or increment of that additional investment to be able to fund the things that are necessary to then not only support that investment, but even more investment, then you can sort of capture a portion of it for a period in time, not forever, but for a period of time, in order to pay for the thing that you need to further support it. So I would answer any questions based on that.
Dan and Dan, if you guys want to come, or Jace, did I see there was another hand up back there? Can you come, why don't you guys go ahead and come on up?
Well, a TIF was never actually.
Yeah, TIF was not set up for Oakland. Let's make that clear.
It was proposed.
Yes, proposed. This was a concept by a past contractor to the city. That's what we're talking about.
Yes, there are many flavors of TIF. The TIF flavor that we were advocating was a district TIF. It's called an incentive district TIF. It's a very specific law. It's different from the laws that are typically used on one structure in one place. The TIF incentive district was designed for a broader purpose, such as renovating an entire neighborhood. It has broader uses of the funds that are part of the increment that Mr. Palinick described. It can exist for a longer period of time than is typically done with single-site structural TIFs. The concept there was based, and it was enacted in 2006, with the state legislature looking at Cincinnati's use of the old TIF in over the Rhine. And they decided to make it possible so that the success that was being experienced in Cincinnati's over the Rhine neighborhood could be replicated in other neighborhoods. So they broadened the ability to use the increment. They increased the length of time that a TIF could be enacted. It's up to 30 years. And the increment is still defined as the increase in value over the baseline at the time of the creation of the TIF. So what happens when you create a TIF? You have a baseline, and let's just say that it gets implemented in 2021, and new construction starts on the Vail site. New construction starts on the AK site. All of that, if it is within the boundaries of the TIF, creates increment within the TIF. The purposes that can happen can be supported for the tangible things that would need to happen in the Vail site, for the tangible things that would need to happen into the AK site. But there's also a broader purpose that the incremental revenue can be put to, and that is subsidizing housing rehabilitation. And that's the key, that's the basis of this plan, that the incremental income resulting from between 8 to 30 years will be fed back into the neighborhood in the form of interest rate buy-downs, infrastructure improvement, public right-of-way improvements, redoing the streets, the security system, all kinds of improvements that we had targeted for examination. Now, what we were looking to do is have a discussion about the uses of the TIF and the revenue from the TIF. Right now, it looks like the revenue from the TIF would be much higher than we expected. But to the exact point of, does inflation over time impact the TIF increment? Yes, it does. Now, what happens, and this is also an integral part of the plan, when you create a historic district, there's a bump in value. People's houses are now worth more than they were before, simply because of the mechanical way that banks and the auditor look at housing and establish comparable values. They look at it on a square foot basis and many, many factors, but values, and I have a dozen surveys to support this, values rise in a historic district roughly between 6 and 8% a year. So if the values are starting at a very low point in the 20s, say, in the 30s, they're already moving up. But if they're starting at that low of a level, an incremental increase of 7% a year makes incremental revenue grow in year 10 through 15. So that this increment evolving from new construction, appraising, rising values, etc., can be put to the purposes that the incremental at the TIF district proposes. And that includes buy down of interest rates for everyone. And that was an important part of the thing. Now, we didn't really stress that in our strategic plan because I didn't want to let an unexpected cat out of an unapproved bag. But it's an important part of it, and it's why everyone in the neighborhood would benefit, because there will come a time when someone will need to put a roof on their house, and an incremental TIF buy-down of 2% would make that much more affordable. With regard to, well, for elderly people who are on fixed income and they own their houses, but the taxes are what they are, that's what the Homestead Act is about, the abatement of increasing property taxes to protect seniors in their housing. That was also part of the plan. The intention is to encourage investment so that the net worth of the people who have been living there grows, so that people want to buy and live in Oakland because that's the appreciating neighborhood. And the amenities that are going to come out of the TIF revenues, because you can't take the money from a TIF revenue and go spend it elsewhere. It has to go right back into the neighborhood. That means Oakland will be the most improving neighborhood in the county through the duration of the enactment of the TIF. There is a leak right here. So, any other questions?
Thank you for that.
I guess I'm a little, so when you talk about a neighborhood like over the Rhine,
Yes.
that's mostly a commercial neighborhood. I mean, yes, there is housing above most
Yeah.
of those storefronts, but
It's
those
mixed use,
are,
yeah.
when we talk about properties that are generating revenue,
Yeah.
that's the difference between a neighborhood like that and a neighborhood that is mostly residential, almost primarily residential. So I guess I'm curious how often residential neighborhood TIFs are actually seen in action. I mean, is that something?
They're rare. They're rare.
So this is something that is not,
The reason,
this is not a typical.
the reason no one has any
make a
experience with
residential
this is
neighborhood
because they're rare.
Okay.
It was designed based on over
just
the
wanted to
Rhine.
clarify that.
They're more than rare. Yeah, they're almost non-existent. That's true.
Because those incentives are difficult to guarantee. And so to guarantee those incentives to a neighborhood.
They have to
is
be
really,
managed.
I mean, it's more than just letting the cat out of the bag. It's
They,
like.
they have to be managed carefully. And the assumptions that we were making in the plan is that they would be capped in the first years before the revenue gets started. But that's a point in time which comes, and then the increasing subsidization can occur and can broaden. And we keep it narrowly focused in the first 3 years so that the improvements are caught by the auditor, so that the new construction going on at the Vail site, the new construction at the AK site is caught and goes into the increment, because the increment then begins to grow over time. And
Don't those have their own TIFs though? Those projects,
They're
those
part of-
particular projects.
they're
have
part
their
of
own
the-
TIFs. That's what's typical.
no, once you're in the TIF, it's like, instead of it being a TIF around one building and one parcel, it's one giant parcel. Improvements can happen within the TIF to specific sites or to specific purposes as allowed by Ohio law and policy and practice. It's not, you can do anything with it. It's very well regulated. But you could put the infrastructure into the Vail site, and that's what we were planning for. It's just now that we have a developer, we have the possibility of actually using this. Now, in contrast to this, let's pretend that we don't do any of this. What happens to that incremental increase in value? It flows to the normal recipients of those property taxes. The county, public services, parks, recreations, human services, and the school board. It does not get reinvested in Oakland. The difference and the reason we should do this is because Oakland has been disinvested for the last 70 years. It has been hit with every negative trend that there could be. Oakland has paid their taxes for 70 years, but they haven't got the benefit of the new investment that happens when a new developer comes in and gets a big subsidy for his infrastructure. All of those people in Oakland deserve the kind of advantage that a big developer gets when they come into town. And that's what this is designed to alleviate. It's also designed to create value to those property owners who've had their properties hugely devalued over time by the presence of the industry, the presence of pollution, and the presence of the social trends that encouraged people to buy houses in the suburbs. We're just finishing up a very large project right now where we have documented the effects of redlining. And let me tell you, there is nothing that drives the value of someone's net worth down than having their house fall in value by 50%. You know, Oakland has experienced extraordinary difficulties, and it needs an extraordinary advantage to recover its values.
Mr. Palaniuk, did you have any comments that you wanted to state? I mean,
Yes, I most certainly do.
okay, I'd like to
Thank
give you
you.
a chance to speak before we kind of continue to the next. Dan?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. You can stay up there if you want. You can head to your seat on whatever you would like, Dan.
Okay.
I think it needs to be very clear that this city and this staff and this group of economic developers who actually have a great deal of skill in the area have very similar ideas on what we hope to accomplish, particularly with this area of the community. And there's no question that TIF needs to play a very important role here. And it needs to play a role clearly not only in supporting some of the infrastructure that will be necessary to some of these major investments, but also hopefully in funding some of those improvements that will go back to the individual residents in terms of helping them to rehabilitate their homes and to do those kinds of things. And of course, we have to create an environment, an ecosystem, and a series of incentives crafted in just the right manner that truly will actually work and be sustainable. One of the things that I noticed about this city when I came here is it had many, 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 many TIFs, most of which were underwater and were not successful. That in fact, the city has been literally paying money from its general fund on a regular basis to cover the costs that the TIF never did because it never produced any increment. We don't ever want to replicate that again. So when we do create a TIF in this case, it will be sound, it will produce revenues, and it will do the things we need to do. Number one, obviously, to support the investment that comes in. And number two, absolutely, without question, we want to make certain that this community that has suffered from disinvestment for years gets the opportunity to do a series of things that will actually help. Now, when it comes to helping finance, for instance, new homes and owner-occupied homes, which I agree with Councilman Mulligan is critically important, when you have historically the lowest interest rates that we've ever seen and you can get 30-year mortgages, buy-downs on interest rates do very little. What works is down payment assistance. On a regular basis, the most consistent thing that you can do to get new homeowners into new homes that didn't be able to do it before is to help them with down payment assistance. So that would be a focus of what we're doing a great deal more than any concept of buy-downs on interest rates. The other thing is there's any number of programs that we can and we will, and we're very excited about looking into that will assist those individual homeowners. What's at issue primarily here is we have a lot of different issues in the way and the approach and the nature of this particular consultant and wouldn't want to work with them. We think we understand this. We think we can put the programs into place. We understand it. It's just approach more than anything. But would we use TIF? Absolutely. Would we do some of those programs? Absolutely.
And I think that's what the community needs to hear, is that we kind of started down one path with some promises, and maybe now we've realized that we want to achieve those goals, but in a different way. And as long as we can explain to the community how we're still delivering that, whether it be the more traditional TIFs for the big parcels that then lead into some infrastructure across the community, but then also down payment assistance, but then also a program for improvements, but then also. And I think those are the commitments we need to start laying out to this community so that they can individually understand what the city's going to do to help.
Without question, and I think when I first came here and you asked me a number of questions about things that I'd done in my past, and what I stressed probably multiple times was the only good economic development is place-based. So what we do in New Mexico versus North Carolina versus Michigan versus Wisconsin versus Ohio is completely, totally different in every case. So when you talk about what might have worked in Over the Rhine or Dayton versus what might work in Middletown is going to be very different in each case because the circumstances are going to be very different. For instance, in Over the Rhine, there was an incredible amount of resources that came from a large group of community leaders that put massive funds, massive political weight, gravitas behind the fact that they were going to make that successful come hell or high water, and they effectively did. Now, at the same time, did it also have a historic district? Yeah. So did that contribute? Sure. Was it the primary source of it? No. There was like 10 or 12 different things that came together as a perfect storm to make it work. Well, that's what you have to create in Middletown. What are those 10 or 12 things that come together to create that perfect storm to make it work? Well, one of them is ARPA funds dedicated to this. Another is Butler County ARPA funds dedicated to this. A third is a TIF. A fourth is making certain the right kind of development comes to the Vail site and that we craft it in the right manner that succeeds. And every one of these other things, it all becomes part of this process. It needs to be organic. It needs to involve this community. It needs to make sense for them. And I think we're committed to that. There's no question about it.
I just want to make a similar observation to Ms. Vittori. You know, when we started down this road 3 or 4 years ago, it was about reinvesting in the neighborhoods. The message I'm taking away from tonight is perhaps we can disagree on what the best tool is, but we're still committed. We still have the same goal, and we can debate what the best method to do it is, but our hearts are in Oakland and we're not walking away. So if anybody had the impression that we were walking away, that is just not true.
Mr. Mazum, did you want to come back up and speak?
2 points really briefly. I think what Mr. Moon was saying just about the tools, as well as Ms. Vittori also, knowing what is on the table, past and current and future, I think one of those vehicles still sound with giving control to the city still is the National Register Historic District. It's a vehicle. It's a tool. It's not a hard hammer hit that you have to do this with national restrictions. So when you're reconsidering and figuring out that plan, please don't let that go. Because it's not just the Carnegie that is apt to lose $1.3 million in the stack. We'll figure stuff out. But there are other commercial properties or churches in the area that can benefit from those tax credits, even though they're a not-for-profit. There are ways that they can capture the money back on their construction. So that's a vehicle. The other one is that I'd like to reinstate for the community. The TIF did provide funding for homeowners who'd been there and still live there for renovations. Interest rates are historically low. They're going to go up. We know that. And if this plan could have projected out the way it initially did, 30 years, 20, 25, maybe it hasn't been done all that time, or scarcely. But knowing that the residents can benefit from that and not just the developers, that's huge. Another tool in that chest to be able to use. Let's not lose sight of that. In the Homestead Act, where 65 and older can work to lock in their property taxes so they don't get pushed out or priced out, but their property values still go up. And when they're ready and they want to, they can list it and move and know they have equity. Maybe get a single-story place, maybe move near a grandchild. I don't know. I'll be there someday. I'm 51. But I know I want to see a return and to have options for the residents that all of us, all of you voted on with the knowledge that it was going to be a historic district on the National Register. I really want for all the owners, all the residents, to know that they have a place still and they see the improvement and the commitment every one of you made. It's going to happen. And I believe in you guys. I truly do. So thank you. And it's not the last you'll see of me. Correct. So,
just so for the record, if anyone can hear, our Economic Development Director, Chriselle Lyons, is just asking Dan what's keeping him from applying for National Historic Registry for the Carnegie specifically as an individual building, right?
correct. Great question, which I'm sure a lot of people are asking. So what will happen is when I apply for to be on the National Register, I will be, my building, the Carnegie, will be compared against every other Carnegie that's out there, specifically on the register in its condition in all the additions that it's had. So they will evaluate where it is right now from the 1913 opening structure to the 1938 addition, which is it's compatible, but the 59 CMU block addition is not compatible. So then they're going to look at, and this is, I get passionate, so this is not at you. Then they're going to look at all the remaining pieces and parts inside. Sure, there's some fireplaces, sure, there's some crown molding, but a lot of it's been deteriorated prior to when I purchased it, when it sat for 10 years, previous owner, water infiltration. They're going to evaluate all that. and the chances of it actually making on the register are very slim. But in a national district, like Ms. Power said, all those contributing structures for the historical value are automatically included. So you have a Carnegie Library, your Carnegie Library from 1913, with 2 awesome additions in that respect.
Dan, I have a
So,
question.
yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
If applying as an individual building, you would not be a contributing building to the National Register, how different would that be if you were inside of that district and applying to be a significant building in that district? I mean, would they take the same considerations for the addition and the second addition when they're determining whether or
I'll
not
let Dan answer that.
your building
Since
is
he's-
significant inside of the district?
Since he's-
I'm just trying to understand what the
Totally
difference in
understand.
comparison.
Yep.
Like, why would they accept it in one situation and not accept it in another?
Correct.
Individual properties, when they go into the National Register, are looked at wholly in all of their conditions and situations and are evaluated as to what has integrity and what has lost integrity on every one building. In a district, everybody is either contributing or non-contributing. The Carnegie would be contributing in the district and is assured to basically tailgate in with the district, as are basically all of the other properties that aren't constructed outside of the period of significance or that have lost their integrity. But it would tailgate with the district, and there is no doubt that it would become a contributing structure. They don't look at the two the same. An individual landmark gets tremendous scrutiny. A building in a district is just part of the district. The story isn't about the Carnegie when it's a landmark. The story is about the district, and the narrative is different. The narrative is, why is this neighborhood important? What is its significant contributions to the community? And the library is part of it. They're not going to look at those additions. And what that means for Dan is that all of the monies that he spends on all of the building, including the additions, generates tax credits. As a landmark, if they exempted the non-contributing additions, no credits on that aspect of it.
The last part gave me some clarity about them not considering tax credits on the additional parts. Like, maybe they would consider approving tax credits on the historic part, the actual historic part of that property, but not the others. So in that situation, wouldn't you still be able to get some benefit from applying as an individual property?
If it gets on, because there's a bit of a gamble. You're throwing the dice. You're saying,
Aren't we throwing the dice as a city to try to get the whole district to be approved? As
yes, but you're throwing the dice one time. The difference is
who's throwing the dice.
Is who's throwing the dice and how many times do the dice get thrown? Because in a district, you've got in one shot you take the whole district in. Each building that is in the district could not possibly go onto the National Register individually.
Or to throw the dice?
Because they are not in and of themselves. See, the difference of a district is its importance of the district. The importance of any one building is the importance of that one building. Now, a nondescript double on a street in Oakland is never going to get onto the National Register because no one famous lived there, died there, or an event happened. But in a district, that double goes into eligibility for tax credits. If we don't do a district,
Only if it generates revenue. Right.
it's used, and let me clarify that, it's used as an income-producing property for 5 years, and then you can turn it back into whatever you want. And I'm doing this personally on 2 single-family houses that we're running as bed and breakfasts, as a combo unit. And so I got both of these individual houses they were into a National Register district, so we moved them, put them into the tax credit, and we have federal and state credits, even though they're single-family houses that we're going to use as bed and breakfasts. After 5 years, we can sell them off as single-family houses, and that is our plan.
Are there any other buildings right near the Carnegie that would constitute a smaller district than the entirety of the Oakland neighborhood?
Here's the issue, and Barb was quite right in basically identifying what the issues are. The issues of a district have to do with the story. You have to find this historically significant story. The story in Oakland is the development from the canal and the industry that caused the canal to become important and locations for industries, and then the worker houses that were built by those industries. That's the whole story. If you exempt the industry areas and the surviving industrial properties, you're basically just saying, well, we have this workers' housing neighborhood, that the canal isn't an important part of it. It isn't a natural boundary. That the railroad on the other side of Cohen isn't the natural boundary. And we pulled it south of the classic Oakland neighborhood boundary because it included African-American housing. And that was an important start of the AK narrative.
And I do understand that. I'm just asking if there are other buildings in and around it that would create a different story in a smaller district.
Back on that, is there any way that the Carnegie could be included in the downtown district somehow? Is there any way to stretch those boundaries to include it as opposed to stretching from the other direction?
Yes, that could be done.
That may be a better approach.
But the thing that I would say here is that the approach that they're talking about and the approach that we had approved in 18, they're not incompatible. They are totally compatible. Everything that he wants to do is basically facilitated by the TIF. The difference is that a lot of other people get an advantage in the TIF, and potentially for a lot more money than we're talking with from this one-time source of funds for the stimulus.
I will remind everybody, we're not disagreeing with the TIF. There's no disagreement here. The disagreement is who does it and how it gets done.
To respond to your answer your question really quick, if that could be an option of stretching that boundary from downtown, central downtown, that could be something that the CLG may want to explore. And that could capture not only just the Carnegie, but First Avenue.
I think it's significant.
So capturing First Avenue also would grab St. John's and anything down there, which is that corridor, which would be a benefit. It's just looking at those options, and up until when COVID hit, that hadn't even been on the table or thought of, I don't think, or if it had been thought of, it hadn't been brought up.
I think if we can be open-minded about how to get it done.
Oh, no, I hear you.
We can accomplish a lot more as a group of people who really care about getting it done.
Right.
Is the point that I'm trying to make. I think there's no doubt that people here, sitting here tonight, care about the Oakland neighborhood. We want to see good things
And about the
happen.
Carnegie.
And downtown and the Carnegie and all of those things. Those things make up Middletown and what we are. So yes, they're significant, and yes, they're important. But there are a lot of different ways to get it done. And I think if we can all be open-minded about that, that we can come up with some really awesome solutions to get these things done.
I'd like to offer, Mr. if you want to come on up and speak. I think we're kind of wrapping up, I feel. Are we getting to that feeling?
Toward the end.
Okay. And as always, if you could state your name and address for the record.
Okay, I'm not going to take 3 minutes to try to get something clear in my mind. I listened very carefully to Barb.
Sorry, can you state your name
I'm
and address
sorry.
for the record?
I'm Adrienne Scheer. My business is at 1028 Central Avenue.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, I live in Monroe. Anyway, that's beside the point. For 79 years, somebody named Scherer worked at that research building more than 50 hours every week. We know that to be true because when my husband retired, they went back and looked at all the records. So that building's important to me. And so I was listening really carefully to what Barbara had to say and what everybody's had to say. And it's my understanding that the research building is important to the Oakland district because the reason the Oakland district is there is because those houses were built for people who worked at Armco. And so that makes it a contributing building, right? Is that what I'm understanding?
Most likely, yes.
Pardon me? Well, so then when I'm sitting here and I, for the first time through all of this, and I've been listening to this, as everybody knows, kind of on the fringe for a long time, I look up at the screen and you're going to demolish the building, one of the historic landmarks of our community. We can argue about what to do with it, but demolishing it, in my mind, is not ever going to be a good answer. Never. It's too important to our history. And we have so many streets in this town that when I drive down them, they look like a 6-year-old who's missing 2 or 3 teeth because of the land banking. We just went around and tore down buildings. And you don't want to hear the story of me in 315 Garfield Street and the land bank, because I'll get really crazy. So I just want to listen carefully and not see anything more get demolished that shouldn't be. There's too many streets with 6-year-olds missing teeth. House, none. House, none. That's what it looks like. Thank you.
The city staff or council have anything they want to add?
I mean, I think just to sum it up, it sounds like there's 3 things, right? One, we have to make some decision on how we're handling the National Historic piece. And we need to have city staff perhaps give us some thoughts on extending the central, moving forward with what had been proposed before, including the AK Steel property in that narrative piece, and, you know, so that we can all look at those options.
This district has already been researched, it's already been proposed, and it has already been presented. This district exists.
But not on the National Historic Register.
It doesn't exist on the National Historic
Right,
Register.
that's what I'm talking about.
It's a CLG.
Right.
But the difference between when the Historic Commission is a CLG and we say, here's our district, they say, rubber stamp, good to go.
Right.
If they have to do it, we're talking more, another 2 or 3 years up there. So this is done. We don't have to start over with this process. It's done. We're just wondering why the rubber stamp hasn't happened.
We haven't put the application in, and that's what Mrs. Powers was saying. We haven't put in the application. So I think we just need to decide again if we want to put in the application for this National Historic Register area that we've talked about, or if we want to look at a different version stretching over the existing one. That feels like one thing we need to figure out.
And didn't I hear that the city could do it, or an individual person could submit that application?
Anybody can.
Anybody can do it.
Yes, and if I may, Ashley and myself had lunch with Dan Mason last week, and we talked about the Carnegie Library and where he was and what was possible and what we could do to support it. And we made very clear that we believe the Carnegie Library is very important. It should be on the National Register. And there's likely other buildings, some inventory of others that ought to be part of it as well. The question becomes, how big is that inventory? And is it a massive entire neighborhood, or is it an extension of the existing historic district, et cetera? But as a staff, we're clearly highly supportive of the Carnegie Library and several of other older commercial buildings like that making their way onto a historic district. And then again, doing what we talked about earlier, which is the right size for the right reasons. But don't forget, submitting an entire neighborhood may very well not automatically get approved because it may be seen as being too large, having too many non-contributing properties, et cetera. May I please complete my sentence? Thank you very much. I do have the floor. Thank you. Thank you. You can rebut it when I'm done. So anyway, I lost my train of thought. So yes, we're highly supportive of making certain that, you know, those income-producing commercial historic buildings wind up there, and if it involves a good portion of the neighborhood, then that might be appropriate. But I think that just has to be go back, look at it, have it done properly, have it done consistent with the community, and make sure that, you know, the restrictions that I guess that get assigned to it and the Historic Commission and everybody's happy with the final result. I think the problem was so much of this sort of fell apart for a time period because everybody changed, everything changed, and then people thought it was going to be picked up exactly the same as it was in the past, which it wasn't going to be. Different people with different approach, different ideas, and different concepts. So we are where we are, and we hope to do it right, and that's where we are.
I mean, Mrs. Powers mentioned when I asked her, she said that, they would look at it and give us feedback. She said they already gave us some feedback, and that then they would have to look at all these buildings individually. Are they contributing or not? That's what she just told me when I asked her.
I have the letter. I have turned the letter over to the city. The district, as proposed, the entire district, has found to be eligible for the national.
Right, it's eligible, but to get approved, when we talked up here, she said to get approved, then we have to do.
Justification for the boundaries, and she outlined in that letter the information that she's looking for, and I have that ready to submit as soon as we reconcile this crazy thing that happened after the approved Landmarks Commission voted to approve the district, the National Register district. Somehow the map changed in the process by the time it got to you folks. That map is not supporting the narrative that is at the State Historic Preservation Office. So we have to reconcile the boundaries that the Historic Committee approved.
And don't forget, the National Register boundaries can be independent of the local historic boundaries that was stated. So what the Historic Commission had approved and the CLG approved, and they said is contiguous neighborhood, it's ready for a National Register stamp.
But I don't think so. I mean, when I just asked her, she didn't say that. She said that then they look at it again because they will give us more feedback because they want to make sure that they make the best case when it gets to the Park Service. And so she said, because I asked her that very question, and she said that they would be looking at each property to make sure, is it considered contributing or not, and how many are contributing and how many aren't, and overall, do they agree? And they may come back and tell us no and to make changes before they would ever send it to the parks.
Absolutely. When we send, I have a draft in the document. I have a draft of the document. I have a draft inventory and survey of every property and every condition of that property. That all goes up as one unit to the State Historic Preservation Office. And then the State Preservation Office looks over everything and comes back with questions. They never just send it and rubber stamp it. It always comes back with questions.
Okay, well, Mr. Romero, who just left, was saying like, all you have to do is stamp it and it's done. But I was trying to make the case that isn't the case. I mean, for us to send it, we could send it now, but we could get feedback and then have to make revisions. So we are not standing in between some immediate approval tomorrow, is my point.
No, and it's not an immediate approval. It takes about 18 months just to go through the mechanics. The board that decides things only meets 4 times a year.
Right.
They always have questions. So it's a process that you go through.
Right.
But the important thing that got lost somewhere within city administration is that when the Historic Commission voted to approve the map for the National Register Historic District, what came down to you folks for approval that I have to submit got changed. And the change took out all of the AK properties that are at the core of the narrative. So the question is, how did it get changed and why did it get changed when the local CLG board designated to make this decision, made a decision, and then it got changed? Because I do have to get documentation of the boundaries from you folks.
Right.
It was my understanding that the property owner did not want to be included.
I have similar recollection.
Property owner did not want to be included, and they asked to be left out, and that is why it came to us the way it did.
I met with the property owner, and
The property owner was, at that time, AK. At that time, when it came to us, AK owned that property. They asked us not to include it.
well, there's a CLK entity.
I'm just...
I don't know who owns who, but
That was the last I heard about Oakland, by the way, was that, me personally, until Mr. Mason came back to council, was AK didn't want to be in it, and here's the boundaries, and that was
We accepted
it.
that, and we approved it.
the conversation that we had in the meeting, and Susan Cohen was there in that meeting, is that they understood the difference between the National Register and the local. And they didn't want to be in the local.
Right.
But they were okay with the National Register. And
They're no
that's
longer the property owner,
That's a
so
completely acceptable
that's not even a
scenario.
factor anymore.
That's what I understood as well, honestly, is I thought,
Was there any transparency when you were given notice that AK did not want to be a part of it?
That's what we were told. It was stated at council.
That communication didn't flow back to Dan and Dan?
It was on public record. It happened at a council meeting.
The sequence of events are that we submitted first to the Historic Commission the approval for the National Register District. And then we sent it up to the State Historic Preservation Office. And then they went into lockdown on COVID and couldn't get back, and that was at the end of 19. They couldn't get around until 20 in August. So there was 8 months there between the time when we sent up the National Register District map that Historic Commission had approved, and Barb came down for the site visit. We toured the entire neighborhood, and then on August the 24th, she sent a letter that basically said, yes, it meets the standards and is likely to succeed. So that was our proceeding point. But in between then, there was another map that was published that exempted the AK site out of the historic district, but it didn't designate whether they were talking local or national.
my understanding was that we were taking out of the local historic district. That was,
That's all that ever happened.
Then all we need is a letter that clarifies that and identifies the original map that Barb has already looked at, reviewed, and says it seems to meet the standards, and then proceed.
yes.
AK wanted to not be included in the local designation.
Right.
So that was their wishes to me and Susan Cohen. As Barbara Powers said, you know, if the city were to proceed with a national, the boundaries can be different.
I guess the question is, why didn't we proceed with the national? It seems like the elephant in the room, right? Like, if we talked about it, we had a map for it, the Historic Commission approved it, why has City Council not then approved that proposed and approved from the commission map of the National Historic?
It's my understanding we did the conservation district in place of, and that went forward. Again, this is before my time, so.
We just haven't proceeded forward. Talking to Susan Cohen, COVID stalled that a little bit, so, I mean, here we are now, trying to talk about it and proceed forward.
Well, let me be honest, the elephant in the room, proceeding forward would require a particular contractor to do it. And if we do that, I don't think we were prepared to use this contractor. We were not satisfied, and we didn't want to use them. So the idea is, there's one part of this is moving forward with it, the other part is who does the work to do it.
Okay. But do we want to move forward? I think this is a key question, and we could probably figure it out now.
I think council was a little taken aback that we didn't know we weren't planning to move forward with it. We didn't know the plan had changed. And so here we are talking about it, which is great, and I'm glad we are. But I think that piece was missing in the chain of events. And now we're having the conversation again, which is fine. We just need to make the decision about what's happening.
And if city staff has concerns about that map, I mean, I'd love to hear them, but I
Yeah.
think that's what we need to, based again on like that long history that I kind of went through before and the more detail from Mr. Barton, I think you can see why at least the three of us had voted for this in general, thinking the National Register was part of it, and then the five of us were on board thinking that was the map. So if something's changed, we'd love to hear it, but I think we bear the responsibility right now of defining what we're gonna do for this national map. And whether that be something you want to come back with more information on, but I think we need to tell the people tonight where we are.
I think clearly there needs to be some application for additional properties on a National Register district. The only thing that still remains somewhat maybe up in the air and that we'd like to spend some time on, is it the complete boundaries that you had seen or imagined before, or is it something less than that? And it should be part of another district. So yeah, we would like a little time to go back and review that and then bring it back to you. Does that make sense?
And if we are going to engage another different consultant to move forward on this National Register application, do we need to, you know, bid that work out and try to get somebody to apply to do that work for us? That's another component that I.
More than likely, yeah, it would require some assistance, and we would have to do that.
And maybe whoever that person is could also be a consultant to the city on what is the best district. If it's, you know, a smaller district, if it's the existing district, any of those things, if we hire another consultant, they're gonna have to be on board for whatever decision, or at least have a recommendation for whatever decision we should move forward with.
Absolutely.
So I think that's another big part of it. It's not just us saying, well, we think we should do this or that. I think this consultant, whoever they may be, is an important part of that conversation.
Mr. Mason, you have one more comment, and then I'm gonna kind of, okay.
Just in general, so when the boundaries are revisited, just keeping in mind the line, excuse me, the lion's share, if not all those, all those homes in Oakland that we're going to be able to benefit from that. And when I say from that, I mean being designated as a historic district, which then their property values and mortgages or anything, if they would go for a loan or sale, would be equated to the other historic districts. Just by default, that's what banks do. So when revisiting those boundaries, great, capture First Avenue, what a blessing. But beyond that, you have all those homes of all those residents in Oakland, ancestors, people who've lived there. I don't know what that expansion of the downtown central, how far that downtown stretches.
I'd like to see what staff comes up with when they get it, you know, and let them look into it and come back. And I mean, they're very smart with some great ideas, so I think I'd like to give them a chance at doing that.
They're not going to very well get a loan on the current value on their homes. They're not going to be able to do that nice thing that brings up their property values. They need something else to help them get the opportunity to base it on the rehab value, to help them with getting those loans, to do those rehabs. Until that is thought about and considered in the ideas, all the times they want to get a loan, they're going to be turned down maybe.
And the CLG is not enough of a designation in that neighborhood for them to use that in their applications? I'm asking, if that's not, it's not enough?
The reason the two work together is because the state credit is linked to CLG status or national.
I'm asking about the loan. Like if someone goes for a loan and they say, well, I'm in a designated historic district for my city. The city designated that neighborhood and calls it a historic neighborhood. So what, I mean, if you're talking about applying for loans, what difference does that have with being on the national register versus being on a local register when you're applying for loans? They don't see them as the same?
No, they look at national register and local, and because the appreciation in national register is understood and widely distributed amongst loan folks, they know that the national register has tax credits available federal and that the state has state credits available. It makes the properties more valuable.
But only for commercial properties. That's the other thing that
I'm going to disagree with that. You know, that's conjecture on a broad brush that doesn't necessarily happen. It happens in a concentrated area where there's really high quality historic structures, yes. But in a bigger, broader neighborhood that is largely distressed, the simple fact of having it in a National Historic District is not going to change in large measure the way a bank looks at it, or the loan that's going to be approved, or the amount of that loan that's going to be approved. I mean, that's one of the fundamental differences. I just disagree with that. That just can't be proven.
I have studies.
I'm not a banker, I just was curious.
Guys, I have studies I'd love to share with you on this.
Okay.
So all these things should be considered, I think, by staff, and we can see them laid out. Like, this is what you propose, this is what we've already looked at, this is the pluses and minuses, and then a recommendation for what we think the map should be, so that we can move forward with some kind of national designation.
And I'd like to encourage every one of you who's here and anyone interested in Oakland, please keep an eye on the city council agenda, because it's probably going to come to city council agenda. And if you have something to say about it, that would be a great time to fill out a comment card and help that conversation as well. So please look at that agenda, because it's really important for involvement in our city. Because you have great ideas and we want to hear them. Because I've learned a lot tonight from a lot of different people that I wouldn't normally have heard from, and I like that. So please, please, please pay attention and come help the conversation.
I have one question. If you redrew the lines for the Oakland district, would you still include the Oakland district as a district? Like the Main Street district, not being a historical district, just an Oakland district, and would it still fall under the city manager's plans of rehabbing? That was my question. You don't have to answer right now.
My initial reaction would be, we're absolutely committed to the area, the district, and the improvements. You know, there's more nuance than to say, is something in a particular TIF district? Is it a National Historic District? Is it other districts? All of those districts are all designed to help. So at the end of the day, without question, we're committed. We're going to help this neighborhood. And what we're all trying to get to is the very best way to help, so that we get the most amount of new investment in the shortest period of time to give the greatest amount of success for the largest number of people. So the reason we're disagreeing is over procedure and practice, not over outcome. I think we all want to see the same outcome.
Yeah, and it feels like the map, then how we do it financing wise, which will be related to the map, right? And then lastly, I think just making sure we're transparent about those, as well as the plans for the State Route 4 with regard to what light industrial means, so that everyone feels comfortable that we're all just talking about these three things as transparently as possible.
And also light industrial is R&D.
Maybe we shouldn't use the term industrial at all, because I know what that means under, economic developer parlance. It probably should be seen as commerce, something like that, or R&D. Yeah, when we say industrial, I guess people
always
don't
a
like it.
research facility. I think honoring the past is calling it what it is. Which
Exactly.
is hopefully an R&D tech-heavy.
Headquarters, tech, R&D, you got it. Yeah, commerce.
Technology is something to invest in. That's where jobs are. And so
High value jobs.
which is those things.
I do have a concern that we go in and say, well, maybe we can change the word so light industry is not going to be, but it's all about jobs, but it's not about the values of the individuals that live in the area. And if we were on the east end having a conversation, there would be the same concern. And so I'm right where I'm at, and that's why I'm here, because I just don't want to see that.
I work for e-commerce, so I know. E-commerce brings a lot of traffic.
Well, that's cars and parking lots, right? Isn't that what we were talking about? Cars and parking lots?
I guess I'm a little bit confused, because we love the fact that the research facility was there to begin with. It's our history, but we don't want the research facility.
No, that's not what I said.
That's how and so I want to help me understand.
I didn't want box trucks and semis.
Right.
And I live over
We're on the
there.
same
I grew
page
up
then.
over there, excuse me. I grew up over there, and there was never that much traffic of box trucks and semis. There was a few, don't get me wrong. There was a few, but there was not to the point that an e-commerce brings. An e-commerce brings a lot of traffic, a lot of box trucks, and a lot of semis. I worked for one for the last 20 years. It started out with just a few semis every now and then, and now we're up to 1,500 people that work there. So you figure 1,500 people over a 24-hour shift, because it's a constant thing. And even if you say we're just going to do first shift, 700 people. e-commerce building with traffic. I don't want my grandkids worried about crossing the street. A kid just got hit on Main Street. I don't want my kid to have to worry about crossing the street because of the amount of traffic on a side street. I live on Verity Parkway. I know what the traffic is like, but a side street should never have a box truck and a semi going down it.
We're with you. We're on the same
That's where-
page.
So when we talk light industry, we're talking e-commerce, we're talking box trucks and semis. If you want to put an
Okay.
office center there, go for it. Office center, good. It's not gonna have a box truck and it's not gonna have a semi come down that street. It's gonna have traffic because Armco offices let in and out the whole time. I've lived on that street for almost 40 years. I didn't grow up on that street, but I lived on that street for the last 40 years, and I don't want box trucks and semis. And you wouldn't want it in your neighborhoods, don't put it in mine.
Heard that. Great, thank you. I'm gonna take one more and we're gonna be done. What do you think? Does that sound good? Come on up.
But Jason Snyder, Tams Construction, 1213 Maple Avenue, Hamilton, Ohio. Came here tonight with the intent of listening. I am the gentleman, my partners and I had made an offer on the the Serta property just a week before the city made their offer. I just want to kind of go through what I've heard tonight. Mr. Palinek's presentation early on was with the ARPA funds, I believe the intent is to tear that site down. My first question is why? We toured the building several times prior to making an offer. It has roughly a handful of roof leaks. There's no real justification for demo in my opinion. Now that you have the funds, I saw that you do intend or will have to clean the site to demo the property. So what's wrong with cleaning the site and turning it over to a developer? It's a solid structure. Again, handful of roof leaks. To your point, Mr. Mulligan, you brought up the residential. Our proposed, and I should probably give you a little history here. We were made aware of the property literally 3 weeks before we made the offer, so we don't have a full concept and plan, but the original thought was that with the outlying property that we would do single-family housing, possibly multifamily. The phase two would be the actual R&D building, utilizing ideally historic tax credits, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to speak here too. If you are going to go back and research this and possibly redraw these boundaries, we're still here, we're still interested. We certainly would like to see that property in the district to help with tax credits. But again, there's hurdles we'd have to, be the recipients of that building now that you control it. But that's primarily the reason I wanted to speak, to let you know that we're still here, we're interested, and again, I don't quite follow the justification for the demo.
Just a question. When you looked at it for residential, did you have any sort of environmentals done? Because we've had commercial structures and lots in the past that basically we couldn't build residential on because they were so polluted.
Right. So early on, Serta had disclosed their phase one study, which did not include any actual testing. It was a visual, and I believe that's the phase one study that you guys are using. We did a little more due diligence. We got a phase one study that was performed by AK 6 years prior to Serta's phase one study, which is a lot more in depth, which is our final site visit. We took a environmental engineering firm with us through the site. Again, just visual inspection, but we did confirm or feel comfortable with Serta's phase one stating that it's roughly a $250,000 to $500,000 remediation project. The building, not testing any soils or anything like that, but the remediation on the building, we believe that's an accurate estimate. So, again, being here on a few other council meetings, I don't agree with the assessment that this would bankrupt a developer. Again, that would be our risk, being the developer, but we did agree with CERTA's phase one, that 250 to 500 would remediate that building.
So to be determined on what's in the ground.
Well, we wouldn't be demoing the building. We don't need, there's no concern on our part with the building. Now, we don't know what's out on the 4th.
Yeah, but you were talking about building out around it.
Yeah, now, the realtor told us, or said that that site, or the land was clean. Now, again, we'd have to perform our own testing, but that's what we were told.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. That being said, I'm going to close this workshop, and I know staff's going to look into a lot of different things, and I appreciate everyone's time in so many different ways. This has been a very long conversation, but a very fruitful one, and I'm really grateful. So our next meeting, we're meeting, council will be on Thursday at noon. We'll be in council chambers for that. Great. So
Just can't get enough of you people.
yeah. Until then, blue skies over Middletown.